I'd like to welcome everyone today to the Alvin J. Ingram Memorial Lectureship. This is the 21st year of our lectureship honoring Dr. Ingram. Welcome to all of our guests and some of our alumni and colleagues from around the country. We're especially happy today to have Dr. Danny Guy, who is going to be our Ingram guest speaker. I'll be introducing him a bit later. First, I'd like to make a few comments about Dr. Ingram himself. So Dr. Ingram was educated at Union University and the University of Tennessee and then Campbell Clinic. He served in World War II in various hospitals. Actually, in 1968, he was chosen by Lyndon Johnson to tour active hospitals in Vietnam. He was only one of orthopedic surgeon in a group of 10 physicians who were lucky enough to do that, exhibiting some signs of his leadership. He joined the staff of the Campbell Clinic in 1947 after returning to Memphis to complete his residency. And shown here is a picture of the staff back in the day. Some of our alumni who are watching may recognize a few of the individuals in this photograph, but Dr. Ingram is on the far right. Standing next to him is Dr. Marcus Stewart, and then Dr. Boyd standing behind Dr. Speed, who was the chief of the clinic at that time. He was chief of the Crippled Children's Hospital, and ultimately there was a cerebral palsy unit added to the Children's Hospital in 1947. Dr. Ingram, during his time, he was a world authority on polio and was recognized around the world not only as someone who had published and written about polio, but was a recognized clinician as an expert around the world, and was frequently asked to actually speak on that topic during the 50s and 60s. One of the things about the Ingram Lectureship is exhibiting leadership, and that's the point of what we do in honoring Dr. Ingram. And it's clear from his record as a leader that he was involved in many organizations. He was the absolute role model for many of us, not only as a clinician, but giving back to orthopedics and to organized orthopedics. And some of the leadership roles that he served are noted here. He was the president of the American Orthopedic Association. He was president of the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery, president and one of the founding members of the Pediatric Orthopedic Society of North America, president of the Tennessee Orthopedic Society, and even the Memphis and Shelby County Medical Society. At the time, he became vice president of the American Medical Association, and that's a very unusual role for a surgeon to fill, much less an orthopedic surgeon, but he filled that role quite nicely during his leadership time. He was honored with the Distinguished Alumnus Award from Union University. He was also the recipient from the Southern Orthopedic Association as a distinguished surgeon. And he received the Pioneer Award, which became the Distinguished Achievement Award from the Pediatric Orthopedic Society of North America. In leadership here, he was Chief of Staff of Campbell Clinic from 1969 to 1976. He was also chair of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery from 1970 to 1979. I think it's safe to say for some of our alumni who are watching this, and many of us who are here at Campbell Clinic today, he was a teacher, clinician, surgeon, leader, mentor, family man, civic leader, but really he was a role model for many of us serving here at Campbell Clinic. And many of the things that are still occurring here today started with things that he instituted during his time of leadership here. So we honor Dr. Ingram today for the 21st year for his leadership role and part of what he's done in his career to allow us to continue to carry on that tradition here at Campbell Clinic. So I welcome all of our guests who are here from around the country, and we appreciate you taking your time today to participate in the Ingram Lectureship. We're going to move on. We have a panel discussion that we're going to do today. We have several guests. First, Reeves Moore, one of our alumni who is practicing now in North Mississippi. We also have Lindsay Stencil, who is an administrator here at Baptist. We have Jessica DeGrasse, who represents Exactech, but is going to represent our orthopedic colleagues from industry. And then David Mino from Cigna, who is representing our colleagues in the insurance industry. The purpose of this session on the panel discussion is going to be evaluating and acquiring new technology perspectives from our key stakeholders. And I want to mention to everyone that there'll be some short presentations by each one of these speakers, and after that we will have some time for questions and answers. You may submit your questions by chat over Zoom. You can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and ask those questions as we move towards that. So let's start with our first speaker. I believe Reeves Moore will be our first speaker. Reeves, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Buddy. I appreciate y'all having me. Can everybody hear me? Perfect. Let me get the PowerPoint up and going. Does that look like it's appropriate? Okay.
Share your screen, Reeves.
All right. Let's see here. I'm sorry, I'm a little technologically not advanced, despite the topic of conversation I'm giving. Where did I go to do that again?
Bottom of the screen, you'll see share screen.
Perfect. I think y'all told me how to do this earlier.
Beautiful. And just start your slideshow now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. All right. So, thank y'all for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to give this talk, and appreciate the staff at Campbell Clinic and for inviting me to come back, and honored to have this opportunity. So they've asked me to talk about implementing new technology into your practice, especially as a new kind of orthopedic surgeon out in the real world. With, you don't have Throckmorton or Dr. Azar or Dr. Beatty kind of standing over your shoulder checking to make sure you do everything correctly. So a little bit different ball game. So we'll get into it. I have no disclosures related to this topic. So getting started, really it becomes identifying an area of your practice that you think that technology can help you improve your your clinical diagnostic skills, your surgical techniques, and just being more accurate overall without decreasing your efficiency in the clinic and the operating room, as well as trying to minimize cost of healthcare. We'll kind of touch on, my experience today, which would be computer-assisted shoulder replacement surgery. Really this is kind of pretty big in the hip and knee replacement world with the Mako and ROSA, but we'll focus mainly on the shoulder today, obviously. So my experience has been with the Exactech Equinox shoulder system, and specifically the GPS or guided personalized surgery platform. And why did I want to use this technology? I had interest in shoulder orthoplasty that really kind of stemmed from my rotation with Dr. Throckmorton back in the day as a fourth-year resident, and really enjoyed his teaching, and his passion about shoulder orthoplasty is very infectious. But also I enjoyed the patients. I enjoy, chronic pain patients that have poorly controlled diabetes and are smokers and obese. Those are the kind of people that I G-haul with here in North Mississippi. So this is something that I wanted to kind of use in my practice. But one thing is I didn't have formal shoulder orthoplasty instruction in my fellowship. So I basically went, maybe 18 months without real shoulder orthoplasty education. Now I had some shoulder orthoplasty experience in fellowship, 10 to 15 cases maybe, but I didn't have a formal rotation, looking at shoulder orthoplasty and developing newer techniques, et cetera, that you would have in a specific shoulder and elbow fellowship. And so I wanted to be able to have reproducibility in my technique, that I could ensure proper component positioning in order to minimize potential complications, just because I didn't get 200 reps in shoulder orthoplasty like you do in maybe a shoulder and elbow focused fellowship. I had a couple co-fellows, one from NYU who trained with Zuckerman up there, and one at University of Florida with Tom Wright, who are both big Exactech guys, obviously, and use the GPS platform, and they talk very highly of it. And then obviously you want to have good local representation. And I was familiar with the rep here who was repping the company, somebody that I felt was a veteran in the field that could help me as a kind of a new budding orthopedic surgeon in shoulder orthoplasty, that could help me out of sticky situations potentially. And so this is what the preoperative planning template looks like. You get CT 3D reconstructions, and you can do reverse or anatomic. And this is glenoid templating only, not humeral side templating. But you can see what the native measurements are in terms of retroversion and inclination. And you can play with this model in various planes to see what your contact is, adjust the components in the base plate or the glenoid, rotate it around, see what it looks like on the model, as well as you can see what it looks like on the CT scan, and in terms of where it's fitting, how it's fitting, is it prominent at any point, where your screw is going to be, those kinds of things. But it's very helpful in terms of, like I said, somebody that's not as experienced as a Dr. Throckmorton or Dr. Brolin, the world famous Dr. Brolin, in terms of getting your position of your components right exactly every time, because you have this live intraoperative feedback. And we'll kind of get into that on the next slide. And this is just kind of a video kind of showing that. We'll kind of skip forward on some of this stuff. But basically, you place an array or a tracker on the coracoid, which is a little bit more tricky than what you would actually anticipate, because it's not as big of a landing footprint as you might think. But you secure that. And one thing I've found is that you got to make sure these drapes up here are out of the way. And those, if the anesthesia doesn't pull those tight, or your assistant is not pulling those tight, that can impede the view of the array that's on the coracoid and your computer that's also in your sterile field. So you begin getting different points of reference on the coracoid and on the glenoid, and we'll kind of skip through some of this stuff and kind of syncing everything up. But this next step, where you validate everything and then you get your pilot tip drill for the center of your glenoid or glenosphere, your base plate, is really critical to me because you can see exactly where you're going intraoperatively with live intraoperative feedback. You can get the center hole exactly where you want it, right down the middle of the vault. And you can see how far you're reaming, the depth of your reaming intraoperatively. And that's what I think it sets this apart from other PSI instrumentation, is you have live intraoperative feedback, at least in the shoulder arthroplasty world, on your reaming and your angle of reaming, your depth of reaming, and your position of your screws. And you can really get some monstrous screws this way. And here you're drilling for your center peg, and you can make sure you're in bone on both your coronal and your axial planes. And it just really makes you feel warm and fuzzy about your components. I'll kind of skip through this, and same thing with the peripheral screws, is you can watch those go in, and as you're drilling for this basically live, and you have this live intraoperative feedback, which I think is which really sets this apart from other systems. So just kind of a quick case presentation. This 74-year-old lady that had cuff tear arthropathy, joint space overall didn't look too bad, but obviously she's got some acetabular of her acromion up there. MRI confirmed a large, massive cuff tear with a fair amount of fatty infiltration of supraspinatus. Decided to do a reverse. Here's her 2 months out with her permission. 2.5 months out, I'm sorry. She's got great forward elevation. She can get stuff off the top of her head, get some off top shelf. She's very happy, very pain-free, and doing well. So, there is a learning curve to this, which volume and repetition fixes that. I'd say, maybe 10 or 15 cases in terms of the GPS part of this. And, now it probably, as opposed to taking me, 20 or 25 minutes to, get the coracoid exposed and get my pins in and make sure, everything is communicating and synced up appropriately. And, it probably takes maybe 10 or 15 cases that to get it down to where maybe it's under 10 minutes to do all that stuff. So it does add maybe a little bit of time, but I don't think it's that significant when you consider the potential upside to this. So, do a lab, do a site visit, go down to, University of Florida and do a site visit with Tom Wright down there. And for the reps as well, it's important for them to see reps as cases as well to troubleshoot problems. And it's really important to communicate with the reps in terms of, what you're thinking from a preoperative standpoint, making sure the CT scans are correct and that kind of thing. In terms of bringing that technology into the hospital, typically, you tell your rep that, hey, this is where I operate, this is where, we're going to do them. And they go before a new technology committee and really don't have a lot of pushback on this because there's really no upfront expense or capital investment, as opposed to, hip and knee replacement stuff when you're buying a Mako or a ROSA or that kind of capital investment. Overall, it's probably a $500 cost that's typically rolled into the cost of the implants due to the disposable coracoid pins and the drape that goes over the top of the machine. But you can kind of get around that if you want to do it a little bit more cheaply with recycling the pins or using an X-ray drape. Like I said, it's cheaper than most of the patient-specific instrumentation that's out there from other industry. So marketing, social media, word of mouth, talking to your patients about using computer-assisted shoulder replacements is always very advantageous. Corporate provides a fair amount of assistance with brochures, shoulder models, noting you as a surgeon on their corporate website that uses GPS. I couldn't tell you how many times we were doing Mako knee replacements in fellowship, and just about every person that came in said, I want the robotic knee replacement. They didn't care who did the surgery as long as the robot was doing it, which is, good and bad in some ways. On the billing side of this, typically, it used to reimburse pretty consistently for computer-assisted robotic joint replacement. However, talking to our billing department, it's kind of fading out, and there's extra documentation required to prove medical necessity, which subsequently ends up tying up your billing folks with appeals and paperwork for really an average reimbursement of about $100. So it's nice if you can get it, but sometimes it's not reimbursed. So, there's always challenges trying new things and learning something new. Orthopedic surgeons in general don't like change, don't like new things. And so there's a learning curve like we discussed. Benefits of it, theoretically, it improves implant survivorship of shoulder orthoplastic components, allows the surgeon to execute the preoperative plan with improved accuracy and live intraoperative feedback. However, these proposed benefits of improved accuracy and placement on implant survivorship, reduced revision orthoplasty rates, and cost effectiveness have yet to be demonstrated clinically. And at most, there's probably 2 or 3 year data out there. There's no, kind of midterm to long-term data on the computer-assisted stuff just because it hadn't been out that long. So in summary, identify an area of your practice where you think technology can help you in terms of being efficient, but you also want to limit costs and hopefully improve your patient outcomes. Thank you.
Reeves, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to call on now Lindsay Stencil. Lindsay is the Chief Administrative Officer of Baptist Collierville here in the Metro Memphis area. Lindsay, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me today. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. I did not do a PowerPoint presentation because I knew I would be challenged in that. So I'm glad to give you today the hospital standpoint perspective on bringing in new technology in our evaluation process and implementation process. Of course, everybody understands the complex nature of hospital environments with the competing service lines that we have, and also juggling our operational needs for the hospital. And so most of the time, that is really what is on the forefront of how we evaluate and prioritize bringing in a new technology or equipment. But there's a lot that goes into the process. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's a lengthy process that is pretty frustrating for most. It starts with that request being made by the surgeon or physicians, and then we actually use a web-based analytics solution to help us be able to evaluate the technology. And so we do ask for a lot of information on the front end with financials and vendor responses, evaluating why the technology is necessary. Is it needed? Is it something that is growing in the marketplace itself? Is it going to replace an existing piece of equipment or technology that we just invested in, or that one of our sister hospitals also has? And if that's the case, could we consolidate and just have the surgeons go to one location versus bringing in multiples throughout the hospital system? Of course, we have to ask about the cost and the return on investment. Hospitals are businesses as well, and so that's important to us. And is there additional revenue? Is it going to bring in more market share? And that's part of that business case that we really look at. Quality and efficiencies, of course, for patient care is driving a lot of our changes today. And then can it be utilized by other surgeons? Can other service lines utilize the same technology? Where is it going to be housed? A lot of times people forget about that piece in a hospital. We don't have a lot of access space, and so we have to see, is there going to be construction that's needed? Where is it going to be housed? Can we move it to another location between cases, et cetera, when we're looking at that? And then Dr. Moore did a great job saying, yes, there's usually a technology committee that looks at all new technology. We look at also through our software analytics, has there been any risk events with this technology? We have to look at FDA clearance. We have to make sure there's no lawsuits pending out there before we really want to jump in with that technology. And a lot of times we do have additional steps to take if it is if it's over a certain amount. We call that capital. And so we do have to utilize our priority ranking when we're budgeting for these items because, like I said, we all have multiple service lines that are competing for new technology all the time. And we have to juggle that also with replacements for an operational standpoint and looking at, maybe we have a 10-year MRI that needs to be replaced. Does that prioritize above something that is new? So all that has to be taken into consideration. But if we have it in our budgetary parameters, implementation usually is pretty quick and seamless. It's usually that front-loaded piece of the evaluation and analytics, looking at all of those factors that kind of take the longest if it's within our budget. In a large system like I work in at Baptist, we have 23 hospitals. So we actually have a bigger committee at the corporate level that reviews our capital, and we have to use a priority ranking for the system. So a lot of times you're competing with another hospital within our system for those capital dollars. So that business case, those analytics are key in driving forward to really get that approval for the new technology that's needed or requested. But once it's approved, marketing is, of course, we want to get that return on investment. So we start marketing, assisting with the surgeons, and in any way we can. And so I think that was already mentioned by Dr. Moore. So with that, I will, I'll let you pass that mic over.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Thanks so much. Our next presentation is going to be from Jessica DeGrasse. She is the Commercialization Director for Exactech. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me and allowing me to represent on the part of the medical device industry representative. So I think I don't have any slides either. I just wanted to kind of speak about how we approach this as a company who historically has been metal and plastic, at least as it comes to orthopedics. And I think the device industry in general really does have a unique opportunity around technology. I think we truly have an obligation to develop and provide the technology really across the continuum of care. So not just intraoperatively, but we're trying to solve clinical challenges. We're trying to reduce complication rates. We want to improve patient satisfaction. I think one challenge that a lot of companies face is finding a creative way to do that so that it's low cost to the end user. And that can be difficult to balance with pricing pressures and new product development. So I think a lot of companies have struggled to develop what is truly considered a value-added technology that's user-friendly, that's cost-effective, that's time-saving, and that's also space-saving, like we were just speaking about. I think because of that, the adoption of some technology has been a little hit or miss to date, but it seems to be trending upward. Everything from mobile app services that keep surgeons more engaged with their patients, wearables that track range of motion and can aid in post-op care, image-based planning softwares like Dr. Moore was showing, patient-specific instrumentation, robotics, computer-assisted navigation options, and some really cool future efforts and some things we're currently working on are focusing around things like machine learning and artificial intelligence that can aid in decision-making around which patients will actually do better with what type of procedure, for instance. So the end goal really being this streamlined continuum of care that provides the surgeon, the patient, the hospital, the payer, all with more information than ever before for both preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative care. I think for the hospital systems and insurance companies, there's a lot of incredible technology out there that can just give so much information and provide, with machine learning, the ability to predict outcomes, revision and reoperation rates, and improve patient satisfaction, which is obviously increasingly important in a value-based system. So I work mostly in shoulder arthroplasty, and specifically for shoulder arthroplasty, the accurate placement of the glenoid component has really been the focus over the last few years because that's the main mode of failure historically in anatomic total shoulder. So that CT-based pre-op planning has dramatically improved the ability to really template a case ahead of surgery, not only choose an implant placement, but also the type of implant now that glenoid augments and custom base plates are more widely available as solutions. In terms of glenoid implant placement, there's been some really good literature out there looking at freehand instrumentation, which is sort of the gold standard. This is a study out of the Cleveland Clinic that showed a really wide range of variability in placement, plus or minus 11 degrees. The patient-specific instruments brought that to within about plus or minus 6, but then over time, through the last 5 to 6 years, there's been some literature showing that PSI doesn't necessarily have a lot of benefit over freehand. So where we're sort of migrating is this newer technology like computer-assisted navigation that has shown accuracy to within 2 millimeters and 2 degrees. And I think like Dr. Moore was saying, it's the reproducibility, being able to go into the OR knowing you have the potential to match your plan every time, and just gives you that confidence that you're doing exactly what you plan to do. And like he was saying, on the reverse shoulder side of things, knowing that you're going to have some assistance in your screw placement, hopefully gain better fixation, longer screws, stuff like that. There's also some really exciting tech around the shoulder with innovations like load sensing humeral liners that can assess joint tension interoperatively, and being able to do this kind of crowdsourced data collection quickly with that. We're hoping you'll be able to provide surgeons with immediate feedback on particular patient's likelihood of, say, instability postoperatively, which could really limit 90-day readmission rates for that particular complication. So there's a lot of really fun things happening, not just intraoperatively, but as it relates to the preoperative care, postoperative care. So some really cool advancements, and I think a lot of it right now is really tip of the iceberg type stuff. So it's an exciting time to be a part of the industry. So I'm honored to be included in the panel. So thank you guys for having me.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Just a reminder for everyone who is on Zoom or participating in this, if you have a question or comment, please feel free to submit that in chat or raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we'll be glad to take your question as we move to the question and answer session. Our last presenter during this session is David Mino. David is the Senior Medical Director and is the National Medical Director of Orthopedic Surgery and Spinal Disorders at Cigna. David, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Beatty, and we appreciate the opportunity to represent Cigna and discuss Cigna's medical technology assessment process. Can you hear me okay? Are you hearing me okay? Great.
Yes.
And first of all, I want to congratulate the residents on completion of their training and to their future success. Cigna has a medical technology assessment committee that's called MTAC that develops coverage policy. The committee is composed of physicians and nurses and includes specialists from assorted disciplines. Cigna also consults with its internal subject matter experts as needed as part of the committee review process. And these internal subject matter experts include, but may not be limited to, specialties such as orthopedic surgery for my team, neurologists, neurosurgeons, OBGYN, oncologists, primary care, internists, surgeons, pulmonologists, cardiologists, and psychiatrists. So we have a very broad representation within Cigna. The committee uses principles of evidence-based medicine in its evaluation of clinical literature and development of its reviews and its deliberative process and preparing the published medical coverage policies. Financial considerations do not drive decisions about medical appropriateness. As part of our review process, FDA approval is necessary, but it's not sufficient for Cigna to consider a technology to be proven. If FDA approval is present, Cigna reviews the English literature, peer-reviewed publications, as well as relevant documents prepared by specialty societies such as the Academy, evidence-based review centers such as Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and HAYS. Levels of evidence are then assigned to the publications for based upon underlying study characteristics. Following that, a research team performs a synthetic assessment of the literature in order to determine if there's sufficiently evidence-based proven relationship between the intervention and the improved health outcomes. This information is presented to the committee and who makes a final decision regarding coverage determination. Final determinations may include a conclusion that a technology is medically proven to show such a relationship to a clinical benefit in a particular population, in which case the population and criteria would be described, or it's not medically necessary compared to another intervention, or it's unproven to show such a relationship, or is substantially unsafe, in which case it's determined to be experimental, investigational, or unproven. Consideration of federal and state mandates, if applicable, always supersede coverage policy determination, as do any specific instructions in the summary plan description or the benefits for that given client, who's the employer typically, and for the customer specifically. The Cigna welcomes input from healthcare professionals and other interested parties. Healthcare professionals often share their concerns and or comments with regional market medical executives representing a specific geography in the Tennessee market. In the Tennessee market, Dr. Jim Lancaster often will reach out to me, for example, with issues that might come up. These market medical executives then convey these comments often to me or else to the committee for consideration. Alternatively, healthcare professionals may and often do send information directly to Dr. Julie Kessel, who's Cigna's medical director and an officer for policy. Often other medical directors may reach out to some of the medical orthopedic surgeons on my team. And again, all of that gets conveyed up to the policy unit. So coverage policies are typically reviewed annually, but they may be reviewed more frequently if there's a significant change that in the literature that would warrant coverage sooner. And I also oversee a monthly internal neuromusculoskeletal team, which consists of medical directors in anesthesia, orthopedics, neurosurgery, physiatry, neurology. And often we look at new technology in that form as well, and then provide comment again to the coverage policy unit for consideration. So I'll stop there, and I thank you for the opportunity to represent Cigna today.
Thanks so much, David, and I'd like to thank all the speakers. I'd also like to recognize we have a lot of our Campbell Clinic leadership who is here in the room with us today. Dr. Fred Azar, who is Chief of Staff of Campbell Clinic, Quinn Throckmorton, who is our Program Director, Derek Kelly, who is our Associate Program Director, and Bill Mahalko, who is one of our total joint surgeons, but also intimately involved in research in our program here. I'd like to start off the session with one question. There's one stakeholder who is missing from this panel discussion, and that is the patients that we treat. And I would like to direct one question first to Dr. Azar, if I could. Fred, what are you hearing from patients when they come in inquiring about new technology and new devices?
Can you guys hear me? I'm on. So yeah, patients come to my office and ask about orthobiologics. They want to know what injectable they can have that's an alternative to surgery or rehab or medication, and it's for anything from stem cells to PRP to anything else that's out there. So that's the one thing that I think is something patients are interested in. You know, that used to be what can we do through holes? What's minimally invasive? What's arthroscopic? And we've certainly expanded those indications. But now they're looking for that magic injection. I think that one day there'll be something injectable that will grow articular cartilage. It'll probably be the end of this century. We'll all be gone from this earth. But something like that will be out there. But that's the one question I get from a lot of patients.
To Bill Mahalko, Bill, you certainly in the total joint world are having this conversation with patients on an everyday basis. What are you hearing from patients in your setting?
So there are a large number of patients who come in asking about new technologies, specifically robotics and computer-assisted technology. So certainly direct marketing now is more and more prevalent throughout all of medicine, not just in orthopedics. And you can see billboards now just locally as well. So patients are coming in, they're better informed, and they're asking, just like Dr. Azar said, when we give the injections, what else? You know, is there anything else now between this step and surgery? And, you know, I had a little bit different take. When I started this over 20 years ago, I thought I was going to be putting metal and plastic in for my whole career. And now another 10 years, I'm not so sure that's the case or not. So I think that's yet to be determined.
Derek Kelly, are we getting some questions coming in from chat?
Yes, we do have a few questions. Make sure my mic is on. Looks like I'm getting a go ahead. We do have a few questions here in our last 6 or 7 minutes. I'll go down the list. Dr. Moore, this first one's for you. So someone is asking, how much time as a surgeon did you spend interfacing with the hospitals and the payers to get this technology for your patients in your healthcare system? Was it fairly onerous or was it fairly straightforward?
No, it basically entailed an email or stopping by the OR director's office and saying, hey, this is a system I want to use. And I talked to my rep, put the OR director in the corporate office essentially in touch, and it was pretty easy, honestly. So really it was just an email or a phone call to a couple of people, and it happened. I think the reason it was kind of easy in my scenario, like we kind of alluded to earlier, you're not buying a space occupying piece of machinery. It's portable. It's in your sterile field. It's overall it's pretty cheap in terms of capital expenses and that kind of thing. So short answer is not much time at all.
Eric, anything else?
Yeah, we've got a couple of more from Ms. Stencil. What is the most common way a new technology is brought to the attention of the hospital administration? Is it typically the surgeon that comes in, or do you discover these new ideas from other places?
Typically, it is from the surgeon, and just like Dr. Moore said, usually the surgeon goes to the OR director, and that kind of kicks off the request.
Anything else, Derek?
I'm going to keep going if that's
I'll
okay.
keep going. We've
more
got a
minutes.
few minutes.
All right, Mr. Grass, where do you guys get your new ideas? Are these often surgeon initiated, or do you have your own R&D that comes up with these things on our own? What's the most common pathway to get a new idea started?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. In terms of the new technology, we have changed our path a little bit into some merger and acquisition type work. When it comes to our implants specifically, that's more internal R&D and new product development. Obviously, we have surgeon design teams and advisory boards that help sort of guide us in the right direction, new technologies and things we should be looking at, bringing those to our attention. But when it comes to the technology, like I said, we're historically metal and plastic. We are not software developers, so we have looked into companies outside of ours that we can acquire to help get us to that next level when it comes to some of the technology and especially software development.
David, I have a question for you. I know this is a difficult question, maybe from a timing standpoint, but what do you think is the life cycle of when some new technology is introduced or developed into when it becomes standard within the insurance industry that we're going to provide funding for that?
Yeah, that is, it's hard to put a definite number on that.
That's why I asked you the question.
Yeah, I figured. So if you look, say in total joint replacement, new evolution, like 3D printing or additive manufacturing, we looked at that. We said, boy, that's fine. There's no need to go further around this. If the total, let's take SI joint fusions when it came out. We looked at that carefully. We wanted to see like 5-year data to make sure that there wasn't failure of those implants, that there was truly fusion occurring over that. I would say it depends where it falls in that space. When we and I was involved in all this, so when we look at, say, the development of disc replacement, we waited for 5-year data on the lumbar, and then once we saw it was holding up fairly well, and then we covered that, and we also looked at specialty society physicians, Academy, Mass, and some of the others, part of that, where they're seeing the evidence at that point. The other, I think we went to cervical spine. We followed FDA guidelines. With the disc replacement, we went and waited for that 5 years, and we saw that the outcomes were very good. And if 2 levels, it might be better. So as soon as 2-level approval came out, we approved that. So we didn't wait another 4 or 5 years on that. So again, it varies a little bit.
Any questions from our colleagues here in the Campbell Clinic? Questions or comments? Bill?
Just real quick, a lot of times as new technology is developed, especially in the medical field, many times through the FDA and then our standards organizations, whether that's ASTM or ISO, technology outpaces our ability to assess it before it's approved. And so the FDA is doing a good job as far as fast-tracking a lot of things, but we do have an issue as far as new technologies coming out, and then the experts are typically within the manufacturer, and they keep that information tight to the chest, and then our standards organizations don't have the experts to get the standards out there to make sure this is safe. I know we have some industry people on, and also I'd like to hear from the from the insurance companies as well, if they look into, you talked about having an assessment committee, but is there anything specific you look at for safety of new technology?
Anybody want to take that question? Safety of new technology.
Well, this is Dave Mino. Yeah, certainly that's a major factor when we look at new technology. Not only how effective it is, but the safety around it. And I gave some examples earlier too. That's a key driver because we're also, by covering something, kind of assuring, our customers that, we've deemed it that it's a safe product to use. No question that is.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Bill?
Yeah, so just to give an example, computer navigation in knee replacement came out around 2000. It was, I believe, 2008 when the first standard came out to assess that technology in ASTM and ISO. So you can see we're talking about a decade behind. And so it would be nice if there were some type of cooperative, which is supposed to be ASTM and ISO, where industry works better with research and academic committee within the standards organizations to make sure we're assessing these technologies appropriately.
Well, I think this is a good way to conclude this part of the program. I think it's really important for the audience to remember that we specifically are mentioning the stakeholder that is not in this room, and that is our patients. And at the end of the day, I think we as orthopedic surgeons, we try to balance the world between new technology and innovation and what is going to be safe and safely done for our patients, but certainly advance our field. And things change so rapidly, that balance is a struggle that we deal with daily and we're working on every day and every month and every year. I'd also like to thank our guest speakers, Reeves, Lindsay, Jessica, and Dave. Thank all of you for participating in our symposium, and we're going to move on to the next section. I'm very happy to note that Dr. Danny Guy is going to be our visiting professor and guest speaker for the Ingram Lectureship. As noted earlier, the history of this lectureship is leadership, and Danny is certainly going to exemplify that quite nicely. Danny was born in Los Angeles, but he ended up, his education was from Murray State, an undergrad degree, and then a master's and medical school at the University of Louisville. He completed his orthopedic residency in San Antonio, followed by an adult reconstruction fellowship in 1987, and then some time in the military where he left in 1989. Danny has been very involved in leadership at many organizations. Again, the culture of this entire symposium is leadership and giving back. He started off and came up through the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons through the Board of Counselors, and now serves as the first vice president of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. And it should be noted from a review of Danny's CV and knowing him personally that he's also been involved in a great number of activities locally in his practice in LaGrange, Georgia, both in the community as a civic leader and leading in many organizations at home, team physician, elder in his church, a member of the Rotary Club to represent us in the business community, and most importantly, as part of this symposium, he is the first vice president of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. Danny, we're happy to have you with us today. He's going to be addressing the topic, the history of orthopedics. Danny, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Let me first share my screen so you get my slides. I hope everybody can hear me. I think the host needs to allow me to share my screen first. And that would be Jacob, the head of IT.
Hey, doctor, you should have the rights now to share that screen.
Okay, great. Hope that's up for you to see, Jim. Can you get it?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Looks
We're
great.
good to go.
All right, super. Well, good afternoon to all, and I'm honored to be speaking with you today, and I really wish it was in person. My family lived, a portion of my family lived in Collierville for about 5 or 6 years. Before I get going, though, I do also want to offer congratulations to the graduating residents and also encouragement to those of you still on this leg of your educational journey. I wish all great professional success, and I can tell you from experience, your education never stops. I learn something every day. I appreciate the kind introduction from Jim, and I want to thank Fred Azar and Quinn for extending the invitation to me today. I'm really glad to share this great tradition of recognizing the contributions and legacy of Dr. Ingram. I've watched his post interview, and it's a wonderful look at orthopedic history through his eyes and experience. And it offers valuable insight to orthopedic surgeons both then and now. But first, a few thank yous, beginning with Quinn. Quinn and I were on the board together last year, and I was very appreciative for the introduction to his sister and her vineyard in Napa, Relic Wine Cellars. My wife and I went last year, and it was well worth the trip. Next, Dr. Kelly, I can't see his face because he has his mask on, but I want to thank him for the care of my granddaughter, Emma. A few years ago, he took care of a proximal tibia fracture. And Dr. Kelly, I want to, again, thank you. We hardly even notice the limp anymore. We've just gotten used to it. Just kidding, really. She received great care, and my family's grateful. I want to thank Fred Azar for his mentorship on the board when he did double duty as past president and treasurer. Of course, as you can see, we followed his lead in business attire for our meetings, as you can see here with Dave Tischer and Jerry Williams. I have good friends from Campbell Clinic in Georgia, and we all know that the mold was broken when with Frank and Charlie. Bob Wells is a colleague and mentor. He finished at Campbell in 1955 and went immediately to Atlanta and joined Jim Funk and Scoot Diamond, and they built the Peachtree Orthopedic Clinic together in Atlanta. Bob was Academy president just as I was starting my training in 1982. And in 1993, I joined Bob in his practice's outreach to Dave Chappelle, Haiti, and I've traveled there annually for over 25 years now. This photo is of Bob during the 2010 earthquake. And I learned a lot from him about third world orthopedic care, and my advice to those interested in this is to always travel with the oldest Campbell's text you can find. This is a collection of presidential shadow boxes at Academy headquarters, and you have many representatives along the wall. But I want to highlight here Dr. Calandruccio, and my connection with him is quite an interesting one. Besides our orthopedics and belonging to the same fraternity, I will occasionally receive some emails forwarded by one of Peter's Vanderbilt roommates to me. You can see this is an astute observation about the South, and apparently born of insomnia. As you can see, it was sent to me at about 4:30 in the morning. I've had some education experience with a couple of Campbell grads. Mike Kosha and I were fellows together in Bern, Switzerland in '87. And Phil Hunt and I were in the same class at U of L, and I really enjoyed listening to he and his father discuss their education at Campbell Clinic. I'm not sure, but a word of caution may be in order for all of you. If Phil dons his sunglasses, move your date quickly out of harm's way. When I looked through your website, I was pleasantly surprised to find James Harkis. James' father, also James, as you can see, was a COSAR professor and chairman at the University of Louisville Department of Orthopedics. He authored the first chapter of Rockwood and Green's fracture book. Dr. Harkis was on my panel of experts for my master's thesis defense. A fine man, a fair examiner and mentor, he wrote a really nice letter of recommendation from my orthopedic residency application. So thanks, James. And a final thanks to these two men. First, Dr. Campbell, who cared for my mother-in-law in 1926. She was from Whitlock, Tennessee, a small community in West Tennessee, just outside of Paris. and he operated on her club foot that year. Many years later, when she was having some pain, I contacted Jim, and though this was no longer a pediatric problem, he graciously saw her for the same foot and leg. That's a 70-year follow-up, and kind reassurance was the outcome. Thanks again, Jim. As I was getting ready for today's lecture, as you can see, I found that I had many things in common with the Campbell Clinic, and again, I'm glad to be here. So who am I? Well, you know the basics after my introduction. I've practiced in LaGrange, Georgia since '87, and LaGrange is about 45 miles south of Atlanta and hugs the Alabama border, which just also happens to be the border between the Eastern and Central time zones. I can drive 10 minutes west and literally go back in time. I used to have a clinic in Roanoke, Alabama, and I could leave at 2:30 in the afternoon and arrive at 2 o'clock. Returning home, I would always be going back to the future. And around here, it's always very helpful if you happen to be bilingual, fluent in both English and Alabama. So we're not quite as far as the crow flies, about just under 400 miles between us today, and I hope the technology holds up. I think the history of orthopedics, the title that's on the agenda, is a bit much to tackle in 30 minutes. So I want to offer some insight into arthroplasty today, and for convenience, we will stick to the hip joint, as principles of modern arthroplasty owe a debt to the man you see here, John Charnley. As you will see in my presentation today, I enjoy history. I'm a firm believer that the study of the past is important to avoid repeating mistakes. So we'll take Winston's advice and look back to help us see forward. 1826, a remarkable coincidence occurs on the 4th of July when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson die on exactly the same day, 50 years after they signed the Declaration of Independence. Our president is Adams' son, John Quincy. Vice president is the now infamous John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is John Marshall. That's a lot of Johns. If you're keeping score, that's 4 so far, and more on that later. In 1826, John, so you see what I mean, John Ray Barton was 32 years old, a talented surgeon from Philadelphia, and he's considered the father of arthroplasty. He's reported to be ambidextrous, and he's best known to most of you as the one to describe Barton's fracture dislocation of the wrist. He also described Barton's bandage for mandible fractures. He championed the use of a brand dressing for open wounds and open fractures. And after his death in 1877, his wife endowed the very first surgical chair in the United States at the Perelman School of Medicine at Penn. Penn's the oldest med school in the country, and they now have over 200 endowed chairs. He published his treatment of bony ankylosis by creating false joints in the American Medical Journal, a case report. He describes the care of his patient, John Coyle. That's right, John again. Coyle is a 21-year-old sailor from Philadelphia who was injured when he fell 6 to 7 feet into the hold of the schooner Topaz on March 13, 1825. He landed directly on his right hip. He had severe pain, unable to walk, and he would spend the next 18 days in a hammock on his side until the ship reached Porto Covella, Italy. There he would spend the next 5 months in a hospital. When he arrived in the hospital, he was placed on his left side. He flexed his hip to 90 degrees for comfort, and there it stayed on his sound leg until he was transported back to Philadelphia in October 1825 and finally seen by Barton. At that time, Coyle's leg was fixed at 90 degrees of hip flexion and marked internal rotation. No treatment was successful in relieving the contracture, and another 12 months would pass before surgery was considered. And on November 22nd, 1826, he underwent surgery by Barton. I want you to recognize that this was 16 years before Crawford Long in Georgia discovered ether as an anesthetic. 41 years before Lister describes antiseptic technique, and 70 years before Röntgen makes the first x-ray. Here's his plan. Create a false joint based on what he knew of fracture non-union. innovative and bold to say the least. We're all familiar with congenital pseudoarthrosis. Fracture non-union, though, was his template, and not like this patient I treated last year who had had this fracture non-union since 2010. False joints like these would not work as they're in the middle of the bone. And as you can see here with my patient Phyllis, when she elevates her arm, the humerus just bends in the middle and she has no useful function. So Barton conceived of his pseudoarthrosis near the upper end of the femur. His hope was that muscle function about the hip would still allow some range of motion and ambulation. We don't know what the hip injury was, but for illustration purposes, I substitute this x-ray. On an awake and unanesthetized patient, Barton employs a cruciate incision, divides muscle sharply, and uses both index fingers to dissect bluntly in front and back, and then employs a narrow saw to perform an intertrochanteric osteotomy. He then quickly brings the leg into extension and notes about a ½ inch of shortening, all in 7 minutes. Coil was splinted in extension, motion at day 20, crutches day 60, and a cane at 3 months. It's an amazing story, and Barton's surgical skill is apparent. A bit of serendipity coupled with imagination was necessary to even propose this operation, and he spent a year contemplating his options. Serendipity, by the way, is defined as the development of events by chance in a beneficial way. Almost 20 years later, Louis Sayre in 1854 would offer another step in arthroplasty. He was the first known professor of orthopedic surgery in America, and he practiced at our oldest public hospital, Bellevue. Sayre was considered an expert in the treatment of morbus coxarius, or TB of the hip. This condition was felt to have 3 stages, and one of the peculiarities was a relative lengthening of the leg in stage 2, due to the large associated fusion with an intact capsule. Beginning in 1854, Sayre performed some 70 X-sections of the hip, and this is his described operative technique. Intertrochanteric osteotomy left open and placed in wire breeches. Here's a patient from that era. And this was what Sayre describes as a little shortening. Not for the faint of heart, the operative mortality rate was 50%. Today, this procedure is known as a girdle stone for Gathorne Girdlestone, who would popularize the procedure in the 30s. Interpositional arthroplasty was unsuccessfully attempted by several 19th century surgeons. William S. Baer at Hopkins described his experience using chromosized pig bladder as an interposition graft. And between 1907 and 1917, he performed some 100 arthroplasties and then reported on them in a symposium at Hopkins in 1918. 50 of his procedures were on the hip, but he also performed 28 knee and applied the technique to the shoulder, elbow, fingers, and the ankle. And here you can see the report. Marius Smith-Peterson, a name known to you, developed a structural molded implant. In 1923, while removing a piece of glass from a patient's back, he noted that a smooth synovial membrane had formed around the foreign body. Serendipity again. He thought perhaps a similar phenomenon might occur for the hip. He first used a glass mold, and while the membrane did form, the glass mold failed, and he would spend the next 15 years looking for the right material. He tried several, including the Pyrex mold seen here. However, it was unsuccessful. None of his attempts worked. It was his dentist, John Cook, who suggested that he try the dental implant material Vitalium. Now, Vitalium is an alloy of cobalt, chrome, and molybdenum and was developed in 1932 by Albert Merrick at Austinell Labs. Austinell Labs, now Stryker. Orthopedic surgeons in Texas, best known are Venable and Stuck and also Asa Beach, had already been performing a series of experiments, and in 1937 had reported Vitalium as a suitable metal alloy for orthopedic implants. In his 1939 JBJS article, Smith-Peterson states that he contacted Venable, who helped him develop a cup made of Vitalium, and finally achieved success for his mold, or cup arthroplasty. And while initially popular, its time on the arthroplasty stage was short. However, his use of Vitalium as a metal implant for the hip would prove inspirational for the next generation of hip surgeons. These three surgeons ushered in hemiarthroplasty. Harold Bowman was the first. Fred Thompson and Austin Moore each developed a unique stem in the early 50s, and the Austin Moore was to prove the more successful implant. Moore even had one placed as a hood ornament on his 1951 Chrysler Imperial. I, like most orthopedic surgeons of my era, have implanted many of these. They came in two sizes and worked remarkably well for fracture, and at a cost of $400, they were a bargain by today's standards. All three devices were made of Vitalium. For completeness, I mentioned the Jude brothers and their prosthesis. While offering good initial relief, the heat-treated acrylic bearing surface lacked durability, and almost all failed quickly. However, as you will see, this implant would provide the inspiration for the modern hip arthroplasty. John Charnley first reported a new operation in The Lancet in 1961. And pictured here are three implants. The metal-on-metal one is the first total hip inserted in some numbers, the McKee-Ferrar. They paired a metal cup with a Thompson stem and a 40-millimeter head. Results initially were good, but longer follow-up found frequent failures. The acrylic implant on the top left is a Jude prosthesis. Charnley wrote that one day he saw a patient with a Jude hip walking, and he could hear their hip squeak. He called this observation serendipitous. Because of the squeak, he surmised that friction at the bearing surface indicated increased torque, and that this increased torque was the cause of implant failures. He set about to prove his theory and created the low-friction arthroplasty. The implant on the right is clearly a first-generation Charnley. X-ray shows little cement and a haphazard trochanteric wiring technique. His implant was stainless steel with a 22.2 millimeter head, and initially the cup was made of polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE. It's a cousin of Teflon, and it failed uniformly at 3 years as the femoral head just bored right through it. In 1962, one of his lab assistants tested high molecular weight polyethylene. It proved to be satisfactory and was immediately put into service, and a durable hip implant was born. Charnley's work provided other advances, and here are two examples: the use of cement and his interest in reducing infection. Clean air and body exhaust suits lowered his rate of infection from 9% to 1%, and all these with modification are still in use. In the now 60 years since Charnley's first report, there have been many modifications and design changes to hip implants, but his basic concepts have remained the backbone for successful arthroplasty, and not just for the hip. The Academy had this piece of art commissioned for our 75th anniversary, and you can see it at the headquarters in Rosemont. It's a shadow box compilation of our history, and on the lowest right tree limb are found examples of hip arthroplasty over those 75 years. A close-up highlights the evolution from left to right, and Charnley can be found right in the middle shaking hands with Frank Stinchfield. But I want you to note this evolution continues to confound orthopedic surgeons to this day. Initial enthusiasm is nearly always tempered by longer experience, and we reach for the next innovation. As I mentioned, there have been some design modifications. Here's the Exeter, which is considered the gold standard of cemented arthroplasty, over 1 million implanted. But as you can see, has had some problems with stem failure, and not just what you see here, but also distally. Metal bearings provide yet another cautionary tale. And not unlike Charnley and PTFE, early success was not the whole story. Not only did these events cause us to shift into reverse with bearing surfaces, but this has also stalled the interest in resurfacing arthroplasty. Design modifications, particularly those that offer very little in performance improvement, like modular necks, is an example of the need for more careful investigation before such implants are widely marketed. There's still problems for us to solve with our implants, as failure doesn't just occur at the bearing surface or with stem design, And here you can see trunnion corrosion. So finally, we get to the topic of my presentation, the future. Is it one of these, all of them, or perhaps none? What's in the future? Well, we've seen a significant shift in technique, and the anterior approach has many advocates. There are many studies that now compare the three different techniques, and I would share with young colleagues this small bit of advice. You're only as good as your last complication. What are these? In order. The patient survives the operation. No thromboembolic event. No nerve injury. No infection. No dislocation. Leg length acceptable. And long-term survivorship. As we saw with Charlie's PTFE experience and with other implants illustrated, complications frequently drive new innovation and techniques. And I do think anterior hip approach is valuable, and it's here to stay. But here's some sobering information to consider. Early femoral component failure may be higher. Andy Glassman from Ohio State in his 2020 JBJS review noted that nerve injuries are much more frequent. Not just lateral femoral cutaneous nerve, which may be as high as 80%, and femoral nerve 5%, while pudendal, sciatic, and the superior gluteal nerve injuries, they're all reported. And also on the right, you see this 2019 report from Langone. And Langone's a high-volume arthroplasty institution, and they have noticed an increased rate of infection. How about preservation? It's been around a long time. Chylotomy or spur removal was first performed by general surgeon John Murphy in 1913 in Chicago. I'll tell you, as a fellow with Dr. Gons at the Inselspital in Bern, we would do a few intertrope and a couple of periacetabular osteotomies per week. These are technically hard operations, and success of these open procedures require the right indications and a master technician. Preservation now includes advanced arthroscopic techniques. This recent article in the Academy Journal notes that those that fail arthroscopic treatment and require total hips may have early implant failure and a higher revision rate. In my practice, those patients I've seen with failed arthroscopy are generally early failures and frequently had visible degenerative changes on X-ray prior to the scope. Hip arthroscopy has grown by a staggering 500% in the last several years. The aphorism, when you have a new hammer, everything looks like a nail, fits here. Remember, good indications lead to good outcomes. The ultimate utility of preservation in reducing arthritis and the need for arthroplasty is really not yet known. How about technology? Well, I enjoyed today's symposium and the panel's discussions. Studies have shown that navigation clearly is more precise, yet researchers, just as Dr. Moore pointed out, have trouble demonstrating improved outcome. In a value-based healthcare environment, there's also that cost thing, and navigation adds cost. How about artificial intelligence, also known as machine learning, also known as, and I love this one, deep learning? Well, who knows if Musk is right? Radiologists may be replaced by a computer, but I haven't figured out yet if arthroplasty will benefit in the near term. The one thing I am certain of, every sales pitch in the future will claim AI was involved in some part of development or use. Biologics can be summed up pretty easily. Here's what our friends from AUKUS offer. Cannot currently be recommended. Patients, as Fred mentioned, are willing to take a leap and pay cash to avoid surgery. The problem? High-level data is lacking that suggests any of this works. It's really the Wild West out there right now. The Academy is directing a lot of resources to the study of biologics to try to separate fact from fiction, so stay tuned. Gene therapy. Well, Dave Chesavar, who's chair at Dartmouth and chair of our biologics committee, tells me there's a manufacturer that is seeking FDA approval right now. As in the illustration, early arthritis may be amenable, but bone on bone, well, let's wait and see. And this is where all our present-day treatments will end up someday. Whatever the technique, the treatment, or the implant employed, a spot for each in the shadow box is already reserved. We will always be seeking a better way, so we discard the old as new opportunities present themselves. But remember, over time, initial enthusiasm will always give way to experience. Which brings me to what I think is the future. Ernest Codman tried to kickstart this concept in 1925 when he and a couple of colleagues started the first registry. These included 13 patients who had a 5-year survival with a diagnosis of osteosarcoma. This is his pamphlet, shown here and advertised in JAMA, which sold for $2. So we're a bit late to the registry game, but we're catching up quickly. The registry is now 11 years old, and it's the largest in the world. The last few years have seen tremendous growth, and the registry includes now over 2 million joints and approaching 50% surgeon participation. Brian Springer leads our steering committee, and we continue to increase collected data elements. We've added patient-reported outcomes and are even collecting COVID as a diagnosis across all our registries. Here's our 2019 annual report. It has 85 pages of compiled data. That includes 600,000 plus hips that are totals, revisions, hemis for fracture, and even a few resurfacing. There's a lot here, and this is a sampling. Each one of these is a page of information. Stem fixation with and without cement, total hip for fracture, revision burden, and you can see it's going down. Dual mobility cups and head size. Survivorship is measured with smoking status, and bread and butter things like length of stay. We also had to supplement the 2019 report, and it has additional information, including survivorship data for specific implants for the very first time. So far, these 6 are running pretty close, but this represents just 6 years of data, and time will tell the full story. So why do I believe registries are the future? Well, it's a win-win for patients and surgeons, and it's not tied to any implant, any technique, or technology. We can compare all of these things and compare the current with new designs and methods in the future. Registries offer participation to all hospitals, surgery centers, and surgeons, and we can establish benchmarks that will promote improved quality of care and safety. Poor performance of implants, treatments, and facilities can be identified and steps towards improvement taken. You know, the Joint Commission now requires facilities to participate in the registry to be a center of excellence. Cost is borne by facilities, so there's no charge to surgeons, and participating surgeons have an individual dashboard so they can see how they compare to their peers and benchmarks. There's also research opportunities available if you're a fellow through the Data Analytics Center. And if you happen to live in California right now and participate in the registry, there's no pre-serve for total joint required, and we'd like to see that extended elsewhere. At the end of the day, those who will benefit the most are patients, and better care should be the future. How about those of you today who really just not interested in arthroplasty? Well, if there's a future for your chosen field as well. Shoulder and elbow is up and running. Tumor and spine are rolling out. The fracture trauma registry is next in line, and there are more to come. So unless you're this guy, the future can be hard to predict. And like Nostradamus, we don't always get it right. It's always tempting to try to see down the dark highway and beyond your headlights. So a piece of closing advice, and to come full circle as we've looked back in time so we could try to glimpse the future. If you happen to meet someone who is smart and determined, someone who is open-minded, someone willing to take unrelated ideas and concepts and embrace serendipity when it crosses their path, and most important, their first name just happens to be John or Joan, pay attention, because in the future, they might be making history. Thank you.
Danny, thank you so much. That was wonderful. As a native Georgian and you now as an honorary Georgian, we certainly expected no less. And we know how this is going to roll into your leadership through all of the orthopedic surgeons in this country as you step into that role with the Academy. We're sorry we couldn't do this in person, but we certainly are happy to have you as our presidential guest speaker this year for the visiting professor for the Ingram lectureship. I'm going to ask Fred Azar, if he would, to do the honors with a little memento for you, Danny.
Thank you.
Danny, it's great to have you today. We appreciate it. We wish we could have you here with us. You know, that lecture is a really important lecture, I think, for our trainees. I think it's Proverbs, as a dog returns to his vomit, the fool returns to his folly. It seems like we keep going back to things that we learned in the past. So it's really important to know history, and I think you really presented that well today. We have this saying here at the clinic that never be the first one to pick up the sword or the last one to put down the shield. So in other words, let a little time go between the new technology and when you want to use it on a patient. So those are really, really sage words. I really enjoyed that walk through history. So if you were here, we would be presenting you with this, with something else to put on your wall, which you'll be collecting over the next few years. But this is the Alvin J. Ingram Memorial Lecture plaque that we pass out. We also give you a little bit of swag. You'll see Dr. Beatty had a Campbell Clinic tie. It's actually Dr. Campbell initials, Willis Cahoon Campbell. All three initials right here that Dr. Canale designed, but Dr. Beatty gets to pick the colors out every time we get some. We reorder these. So we'll send you some swag from the clinic. So really, thank you again for your time today, and I hope you have a great next few years in the ride that is a presidential line. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us today. Godspeed and God bless. Thank you.
Thanks again for the honor.
Danny, thank you so much. For all the participants today, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we will reconvene with presentations after that. So quick break for everyone, and we'll see you in 5.
welcome back. Thank you for everybody for that terrific symposium to start off with. That was very informative, and thank you also to Dr. Guy for his talk as well. Before we launch into the Senior Resident Research Symposium, we'd like to thank our sponsors, in particular our major sponsors, which are Arthrex and Gentleman Orthopedics, Zactec, and Paragon 28. So my name is Quinn Throckmorton. I'm the Residency Program Director, and it's my honor to moderate the symposium of research presentations from our PGY5 residents. So what we're going to do is do 4 research presentations. We'll have a quick Q&A for those, and we'll bring in our other 4. So for social distancing purposes, the other chief residents are out of the room, and so we're going to parade you up here one at a time. This is sort of like how I'm sure most of our staff and residents remember interviewing Dr. Guyton and doing the surgical skills thing where they have to kind of line up out in the hallway and then come in to thread a bolt on a nut or something like that. So there's going to be the same sort of thing. We'll parade up here. So first up is Chad Campion, the learning curve in percutaneous endoscopic discectomy.
All right, as Dr. Throckmorton said, I'm Chad Campion. I'll be talking about the learning curve in fully endoscopic discectomy. Nothing's happening. All right. For disclosures, our only disclosures are Dr. Gardaki, who is the primary investigator, is a Joint Max teaching and consulting physician as well as an integrity consulting physician. A little background. The endoscopic discectomy has been shown to be a safe and effective way to treat lumbar disc herniations. It's a minimally invasive technique using either a 7 or 8 millimeter tube. And this is pretty much the size of a pencil through a single incision. You're able to effectively remove a herniated disc or other compressive pathology, either through an intralaminar or a transforaminal approach. So for our study, we looked at operative times as an indicator of the learning curve itself, as well as reoperation rate and patient-reported outcomes. Secondarily, we also looked at complications and discharge time from the PACU postoperatively. So for our methods, we looked at 90 elective consecutive patients done by a single surgeon at a ASU. There were 46 transforaminal and 44 intralaminars. Interestingly, at the time of this study, all the transforaminals were done under conscious sedation while the intralaminars were done with general anesthesia. This comes up again later. This was only for the anesthesiologist preference, not necessarily surgeon-driven, and both can be done through either general or conscious sedation. So our VAS and ODI here are our outcome scores. You can see that both were effective. Both approaches were effective at reducing the VAS scores and the ODI. ODI is your disability index. The intralaminars, you can see, did somewhat better, although this was not clinically significant. The likely reason for this is the patient age difference between the two groups. The interlaminars tend to be younger people who get a central herniation and can be easier done through an intralaminar approach, while the transforaminals generally older people with a foraminal far lateral kind of stenosis. That's just part of the pathology that goes into it, and the approach, whether intralaminar or transforaminal, is only picked by really the location of the pathology. All right, so for our operative times here, we did a moving average plot of 10 consecutive patients and plotted that with a best fit curve. You can see there was a sharp decrease in operative time over to about 40 there, which did correspond to our inflection point of the best fit curve. So at 40 in the moving average plot corresponds to about 50 patients, which we felt was indicative of our learning curve. The operative time did decrease about 40% over those first 50 patients. The operative time, the time from discharge to PACU was 87 for the intralaminar and 61 for the transforaminal. Again, this is just because of the difference with conscious sedation versus the general anesthesia. Here we have a Kaplan-Meier curve of the reoperations. There was no significant difference between the groups, so what we did was divided into 4 groups, the 90 patients. It's a little bit hard to see there, but there was no significant difference between the 4 groups. Overall reoperation rate was 8.8%, 8 of the 90, and our reherniation rate was 6 of 90 for 6.7%, and that's well within the published reherniation rates with other approaches. This is just a list of the reoperations and what they ultimately got. For them to get fusions, 3 repeat discectomies, and then one of them actually got a blood patch for a CSF leak that was not responded to medical treatment. So in summary, the transfemoral and intralaminar both had significant improvement in VAS and ODI. Our overall reoperation rate was just under 9% with a reherniation rate of 6.7, again, well within the published numbers for other approaches. About 50 consecutive cases were what we found to get through the first learning curve. Interestingly, if you look back to that curve, there is a secondary drop-off towards the end of our patient cohort, and this is felt to be probably indicative of a secondary learning curve, but we are collecting more patients to analyze that. Thank you.
It's a very odd feeling to not have applause go on after the end of a talk these days. It's a sign of the times, I think. Yeah, right. Next is Ryan Eads. Mood disorders are associated with inferior outcomes following anatomic total shoulder arthroplasty.
Hi. So I have my paper. Mood disorders are associated with inferior outcomes of anatomic shoulder arthroplasty. All right, here are our financial disclosures. We have a few that you can read, mostly for royalties, as well as some teaching. So starting with the background, anatomic total shoulder arthroplasty, or TSA, is growing in frequency in the United States. In 1998, there was just about 8,000 put in the U.S., and then 12 years later, in 2010, we're already up to about 40,000, and that's increasing every year. Some things, we have an aging and active population, which are people are staying, again, alive longer and healthier longer and wanting to be more active as they get older. And we have some expanding indications as we learn more. So we have glenohumeral arthritis, you have osteonecrosis, rheumatoid arthritis, post-traumatic arthritis, as well as other inflammatory arthropathies. So as these numbers grow every year, it's important to identify patient-specific factors, different comorbidities that may affect outcomes, and to try to know what patient populations may be better served with getting these procedures. Brings us to mood disorders. It's been studied in other facets of orthopedics and has been linked to inferior outcomes all the way from postoperative pain, anemia, blood transfusion rate, wound complications, and others that we have listed up here. So again, like I said, mainly that's been teased out more in the literature in hip and knee arthroplasty and spine surgery, but hasn't really been looked into shoulder arthroplasty yet. So mood disorders, one reason it's common, mood disorders are overall relatively common in the United States, with the 2 largest prevalences are being depression at 29% and anxiety at 21% of the population. So our purpose and hypothesis. Purpose, investigate if mood disorders influence patient outcomes and pain relief with anatomic total shoulder replacements. And our hypothesis when starting this research was we thought that mood disorders will have inferior outcomes and worse pain control following total shoulder replacements. So our methods, we did a retrospective review of a single surgeon, fellowship trained in shoulder and elbow surgeon. We had a total of 87 patients. These all had a follow-up of over 2 years. There were 2 different cohorts. We had 24 in the mood disorder group and then 63 without mood disorder that we had in the control group. So we excluded hemiarthroplasty, revision arthroplasties, reverse total shoulders, and patients who didn't have adequate clinical and radiographic follow-up. So we measured preoperative and postoperative ASES scores for outcomes. We did pain in the visual analog scale, active range of motion, and strength in the forward elevation, internal rotation, and external rotation. We compared the indications for surgery, that being OA, RA, post-traumatic arthritis, or some other reason. We had comorbidities, hand dominance, and gender. We had preoperative imaging, and we compared the glenoid wear to make sure that one didn't have a specific worse pathology than the other. And we divided that up by the Walsh classification. We had a mild wear group, which was A1 and B1, and then the advanced wear was A2, B2, and B3. We measured narcotic use. We had patient-reported outcomes on their consumption as far as if they were still taking narcotics at final follow-up, as well as we looked through the CSMD, or the Controlled Substance Database, for a 3-month query before their last follow-up to see if they had any prescriptions filled. And then the mood disorder group and mood disorders were either documented by patient-reported on a questionnaire at the beginning of their seeing us, or if they had documented mood stabilizing drugs. So it brings us to our results. We had a similar follow-up in time in both groups. It wasn't statistically significant. We had no difference between BMI, laterality, and number of comorbidities in our groups. There's no difference in complications, reoperations, or radiographic complications. Really, between our strength and range of motion, the only point where we had a difference was in forward elevation between the two groups, where the mood disorder group had a significantly worse forward elevation pre-op, but did not have one post-op. So there's no difference in operative indications for either of the groups, and the preoperative, and this really brings us to more of what we end up finding the differences between the groups. The preoperative and postoperative ASESs were significantly better in the control group, but the degree to which they improved was not statistically significant. And the VAS postoperative values were better in the controls, but preoperative and the mean changes were not significantly different between the two. And one of the biggest differences was narcotic use was drastically lower in the control group. We had the mood disorder group, over half of them were still on narcotics at final follow-up. And again, this was at least 2 years out from surgery. In the control group, there was only 13%. So discussion. Patients with mood disorders have worse preoperative and postoperative ASES scores, functional scores, but they improved by similar amounts between the two. And mood disorder group had worse final pain scores, but they also improved by a similar amount that the controls did. So patients with mood disorders, they were 4 times more likely to still be on narcotics at final follow-up. And there was no increase in complications or reoperations between the two. So in summary, really patients with mood disorders, they do have inferior clinical outcomes and more pain after surgery, but they do improve significantly with the surgery. So how we can bring this to practice, I think that total shoulder arthroplasty is a viable option for patients with mood disorders, but it's just very important that we properly counsel them on the potentially lower functional outcomes at the end, as well as incomplete pain relief, although they do get better. All right, that's all. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ryan. Next up is Matthew Fournier, the frequency of mediastinal injury in acute posterior sternoclavicular fracture dislocations, multi-center study.
Hi there, my name is Matt Fournier. I'm a 50th resident here at the Campbell Clinic. I'd like to echo my thanks for the opportunity to present our research to the Ingram Foundation, the Campbell Foundation, as well as our sponsors. Today I'll be presenting on the frequency of mediastinal injury and acute posterior sternoclavicular fracture dislocations from our multi-center cohort. I'd like to thank our co-authors from all of our institutions. None of us have anything relevant to disclose. It's well known that acute posterior sternoclavicular injuries are rare and even rarer in skeletally immature patients. They're classically associated with concern due to their proximity to the mediastinal structures and great vessels. The literature is replete with recommendations and texts and manuscripts recommending the presence of a general thoracic surgeon during the repair. This is an example from a seminal text by Dr. Rockwood stating, "We suggest that a thoracic surgeon be part of the surgical team in the event that catastrophic bleeding occurs." Despite this widespread belief, there are no studies specifically characterizing the rate of mediastinal injury before or during treatment. To that end, the purpose of this study was to identify the rate and characterize the mediastinal involvement in skeletally immature patients with acute posterior sternoclavicular dislocations. We also sought to determine the rate of injury to mediastinal structures during surgical treatment of these injuries. We obtained IRB approval at 6 pediatric level 1 trauma centers across the country. We included patients aged less than 25 years, as this was chosen as a surrogate for skeletally immature patients. We included only acute injuries, and injuries were identified by CPT code. We collected demographic information and also evaluated plain radiographs and cross-sectional imaging. We recorded mediastinal structure involvement as well as mediastinal injuries during the course of treatment. We also documented whether general or thoracic surgeons were available during the course of treatment. We were able to identify 125 cases of acute posterior sternoclavicular injury. 88% of these were male, and the mean age of our cohort was 14.7 years of age. Of these, 62% were right-handed, and nearly three-quarters sustained their injury during a recreational competitive sporting event. We had an equal number of same-level falls and high-energy injuries. 70% were fracture dislocations, with the remaining representing true dislocations of the medial sternoclavicular joint. The mean time from injury to treatment was 1.2 days. All of the patients in our cohort presented with arm pain. Additionally, 28% presented with another symptom, most commonly dysphagia. We also recorded dyspnea, paresthesias, and dysphonia. There was no significant statistical correlation between CT findings of compression, say, on the trachea and symptoms such as dyspnea. We evaluated the imaging interpretation for 95 patients. We noted impingement of the mediastinal structures, at least one, sometimes multiple, in 64% of patients. The most commonly compressed structure was the ipsilateral brachiocephalic vein, followed by the ipsilateral subclavian vein, the ipsilateral carotid artery, the superior vena cava, and the trachea. In our 125 patient cohort, 8% underwent a successful closed reduction in the operating room. The remaining 92% underwent open reduction and internal fixation. 25 patients had a failed attempted closed reduction. 68% of cases had a documented vascular or thoracic surgeon available for the case. In our cohort, we were unable to identify any instance of vascular or mediastinal injury during the course of evaluation or treatment of these injuries. In discussion, we've established that these are rare injuries in young patients. There are reports in the literature regarding outcomes of surgical treatment for these injuries, but none specifically addressing mediastinal injury or those structures involved. There are some historical case reports from the 1950s and earlier discussing mortalities from this type of injury, which were commonly associated with thoracic injury. Many died in the field. Since we were unable to identify any instance of complication in our cohort, we turned to the statistical rule of 3 to estimate that risk in the population. We found that risk to be 2.4%. We do acknowledge that we excluded chronic dislocations, which likely have a more complicated course of care. With regard to resource allocation, 68% of cases had this consultant available for the case. We also found wide variability regarding the usage of resources by the hospital. For example, one center in Philadelphia had a cardiothoracic surgeon and a bypass team immediately available for the surgical treatment of every single case. In conclusion, acute posterior sternoclavicular injuries are rare in young patients, but more than half of them do display compression of the mediastinal contents on cross-sectional imaging. Despite this, careful open reduction, internal fixation, and treatment for these injuries can be safely performed with a low rate of complication. We do not suggest that that we treat these injuries casually as a result of these findings. We do suggest that our findings would be useful in the allocation of institutional resources in order to maximize the patient's safety during treatment of these injuries. Thank you very much.
All right, so our last of the first half is Pete Henning, who's going to talk about reliability testing of the Mayo Elbow Performance Score in postoperative patients.
Thanks, everyone. Pete Henning. Just want to echo previous speakers, giving thanks to the Ingram family, Campbell Clinic, the sponsors, and all the viewers that have made this possible in this weird climate that we're currently in. My study, reliability testing the Mayo Elbow Performance Score in postoperative patients. So the Mayo Elbow Performance Score, the MEPS, commonly used tool to evaluate clinical outcomes for patients with elbow conditions. It previously been validated for evaluation of non-surgical conditions about the elbow. We look to expand on a previous study to include surgical patients. So the purpose, we looked at intra-observer reliability of the MEPS as well as inter-observer reliability when compared to the previously validated Oxford elbow score in a population of patients who were at least 2 years out from their elbow surgery. So we ended up with 42 patients, at least 2 years removed. We excluded patients that had any interval substantive treatment or change in their elbow condition, also patients that were less than 2 years. We conducted 2 phone interviews. At the first interview, they were given an initial MEPS questionnaire. About 2 to 3 weeks later, we gave them a repeat MEPS questionnaire as well as administered the Oxford elbow score questionnaire. And again, we looked at the inter and intra-observer reliability as our primary endpoints. So for results, just the operative treatments included total elbow arthroplasty for the majority, RIF of various traumatic elbow injuries, radial head arthroplasty, terrible triad repair, and distal biceps tendon repair. There are the scores, initial, second MEPS, and then the OES. The thing we're looking at, the inter-class correlation coefficient, the Pearson correlation coefficient, each showed substantial agreement, 0.9 and 0.87 respectively. So using the previous established 0.8 correlation, we had strong intra-observer reliability at different time points between the MEPS 1 and 2. We also had strong inter-observer reliability, convergent validity when compared to the validated Oxford elbow score instrument. So we concluded that the MEPS is a valuable method of assessing functional outcomes in a postoperative elbow patient, which will help us in the current healthcare climate of the importance of outcomes, patient outcomes. It's just another tool. Thank you.
Just another tool, I like. Okay, so our four chiefs will come up here. We have some questions from our panel, Dr. Beatty, Dr. Azar, Dr. Kelly, and Dr. Mahalko. So what will happen is if there's a question, I want you guys to step to the podium to answer it. Anything from our panel? Dr. Azar?
Sure. Chad, I had a question about the secondary learning curve. Tell me a little bit more about that. What were you referring to there?
This one working?
You gotta be on camera. You gotta be on camera. Just step to the podium.
All right, so our learning curve, the operative time, at first had a slope that went down, kind of leveled off, and that's what we called our learning curve, was at that level point. At the end of our curve, I think it was about 80 or 70, 80 patients, it tails off again, and the current operative time is about 42 minutes, I believe. Our learning curve, we said, was about 65 minutes was the average. So it seems like at about probably 100 patients, there is a secondary stabilization of the operative times. So there's an initial point where you get comfortable with it, and then you really can drop the operative time quite a bit more at a secondary time.
Okay, so it's basically, there's not anything different during the procedure, or during the procedure differently. It's just something that came with the whole, just the...
It seems like the first 50 is getting used to. It's a very different type of procedure as far as the way it's technically done. It seems like that is probably the first 50, and then the second 50, or wherever that secondary curve is becoming more facile with that, and then also comfortable with what you can do with the anatomy there, because it's such a different look at what you're doing.
The technique didn't change at all, though?
No, the technique is exactly the same.
Thank you.
Dr. Beatty?
Matt, I have a question for you. At the end of this research, a recommendation to orthopedic surgeons who are going to do this procedure regarding the need or lack of need for standby for cardiovascular or thoracic surgeon. What's the final recommendation after you've done this research?
We specifically wanted to stay away from a hard and fast recommendation regarding the outcomes of this research, because I think this injury does deserve a healthy amount of respect with regard to the anatomy. And really what we said in the conclusion was that we want institutions to take into account what exactly their resources are, and perhaps it's not necessary to have the entire cardiothoracic team available for every case. Perhaps it's more a better stewardship of resources to simply have those folks available on call and to do the case in an operating room that could accommodate them should the need arise, though we now acknowledge that that need is rare.
Yeah, our policy has been in the past to have a CV or a thoracic surgeon just somewhere nearby. Say, hey, we're doing this case, just made them aware, and that was it. Not anything more formal like having a team stand by.
Supported by our work, I think.
Dr. Mahalko, you've been looking expectant.
Yeah, just real quick for Dr. Eads on mood disorders. So, you know, in the hip and especially the knee world, we know what you know, the mood disorders do on patient perceived outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you do different now, knowing after doing your study, as far as talking to the patient about their outcome?
So one would definitely be, so we said we know that they do improve significantly. Again, in most things, about the same amount. Is mostly that they start in a different place and kind of end in a different place overall. So I would say that it's still a very real and beneficial surgery for patients with mood disorders. But one of the biggest things is just I would spend extra time making sure that you think their pathology is actually coming from glenohumeral arthritis or something that you could fix potentially, and that you don't have any overlapping pain catastrophizing or any other things that sometimes go along with mood disorders, and they may not have any type of fibromyalgia where it's more of a mixed bag. To make sure that it's very clear that that's what you think you're helping, and then also just part of it is to properly counsel the patients and know that you will probably get better, but you may not be perfect. That you know that they will still higher chance of needing pain medication and still not being as good off as someone who does not have mood disorder.
So no different than our arthroplasty world.
No, not really. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Henning, can you speak a little bit about the applicability of outcome scores, patient-reported outcomes in the broad sense? Is this something you're going to use in your practice, or is this really just a research tool?
I think it's we're going to be forced in the new healthcare climate to use these type of tools to prove what we're doing intervention-wise, whether it's surgery, non-op, is worthwhile and is actually helping patients. And I think also in your own practice just gives you more tools to look between interventions and best treat your patients. I think it's both.
Other questions from our panel? All right, guys, y'all are off the hook. Okay, we will bring in our second set of chief residents here. Another opportunity to thank our sponsors. All right, here they come. So our first presentation here on the second half will be by Andrew Holt. MRI lag times for knee pathology increased after implementation of the Affordable Care Act.
All right. I'd like to thank the Ingram family, all of our sponsors, and the Campbell Foundation for letting us present our research today in this alternative environment. I have no disclosures to disclose. So a little bit of background with my study. The Patient Protection Affordable Care Act was implemented or signed into law by President Obama in March 2010. It was structured as a gradual rollout. So most of its most impactful resolutions took effect on January 1st in 2014. Some of those include the individual mandate to require everyone to have health insurance, and Medicaid expansion, as well as tax credits for insurance purchase through exchanges for persons within lower income levels. By 2015, an estimated 7 to 16 million uninsured Americans had gained health care coverage as a result of this legislation. A big concern when you're talking about expanding coverage is how is that going to impact care moving forward, both for the newly covered and the people who previously had coverage. Clinically, a lot of the orthopedic surgeons were able to kind of sense some shifts in coverage and in reimbursement approval for MRI scans and surgery, but there was not much literature out there previously that quantified this change. Changing gears a little bit, knee pain is the most common presenting complaint in the orthopedic office. It's independent of socioeconomic class, and there's a wide variety of presenting pathology regarding the knee. MRI is a staple for evaluating and treating knee pathology, and timely treatment is important for preserving cartilage, meniscal tissue, and improving outcomes. So the purpose of our study was to evaluate the impact on the Affordable Care Act on MRI timing by comparing the lag times for completing this MRI study compared to when it was ordered both before and after the Affordable Care Act legislation was implemented. We also categorized this group into Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial insurance payers to see if there was any adverse effects to one certain group. Our methods, we did a retrospective chart review of all MRI scans completed at our private imaging center from 2011 to 2016. We then structured those into two separate groups termed pre-ACA and post-ACA, and we made sure to seclude those groups so that the MRI scan had to be ordered and completed within the same 3-year period to prevent crossover. We then calculated the lag time by comparing the initial clinic visit date with the MRI completion date. We then applied statistical evaluation to determine the outcomes. As a result, we had 5,543 total MRI scans in our study. The average MRI lag time increased by an average of 14 days after ACA implementation. Subgroup analysis showed that the commercial cohort, which was our largest cohort, increased by an average 13 days, and the Medicaid cohort increased by 35 days on average. In the Medicare patients, there was no significant change. As a result of the implementation, we also saw a 5.5% increase in Medicaid patient representation in our MRI study. So in essence, more Medicaid patients were able to get MRI scans after the implementation. In addition to the previous analysis, we also saw that fewer patients had completed MRI scans within 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and 12 weeks of the initial clinic visit after the ACA took effect. So take-home points, we saw a statistically significant delay in obtaining MRI scans after the Affordable Care Act was implemented, particularly for commercially insured and Medicaid patients. The exact cause of this was outside the scope of our study. The healthcare system is a large beast and has a lot of factors going into it. But the main concern about increasing access at the expense of compromising care quality remains a valid issue. Longer wait times for MRI completion can diminish patient satisfaction, can delay operative treatment, and can increase injury morbidity. On the other hand, fewer MRI scans obtained can reduce healthcare costs and limit unnecessary testing. So it's a balance that we're trying to find. The real take-home point is that as healthcare policies continue to change, we need to be mindful of their effects on both our patients and our own practice and scrutinize them with data rather than just consensus statements or loose comparisons. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, next is Kat Olinger, the effect of underdosing prophylactic antibiotics in the care of open tibial fractures.
Okay. Thank you to the Ingram family, the Campbell Foundation, and all our sponsors for allowing us to present. I am discussing the effect of underdosing prophylactic antibiotics in the care of open tibial fractures. This is a joint study we did at Regional 1 with Dr. Weinlein. Oh. Thanks. The background of this study is that we administer antibiotic therapy to open fractures in patients who present to our hospitals, regardless of the level 1 trauma center or not. that the single most important factor in treating an open fracture is the time to administration of antibiotics, which has been documented in further studies previous to ours, and that the purpose of our study was to determine the frequency and effect of underdosing patients with prophylactic weight-based antibiotic therapy, and that we hypothesized that they would have a higher rate of infection if they were underdosed. Our outcome was a deep infection, which in literature is very hard to describe. Our definition of a deep infection was as an infection requiring surgical debridement after definitive treatment of an open tibia fracture, as well as treatment of a non-union with documented intraoperative cultures within 1 year following the injury. Our methods is a retrospective retrospective review of a level 1 trauma center of a 5-year period, and we assessed demographic data as well as type and dose of the initial prophylactic antibiotic and as well as the timing. Our weight-based dosage was as follows: 1 gram for patients less than 80 kilograms, 2 grams for patients from 80 to 120 kilograms, and 3 grams for patients who were over 120 kilograms. Our results: 62 patients met our criteria over a 5-year period with type 3A or B open extra-articular tibia fractures. A third of those patients were underdosed with ANSEF. Pre-injury hypertension documented by the past medical history or hypertension on presentation conferred a 3-time greater risk of developing a deep infection. Statistical analysis with multivariate logistic regression analysis did not reveal a significant reduction in the odds of infection with appropriately weight-based ANSEF. Average time from antibiotic administration from those who had a infection versus those who didn't was 157 minutes versus 62, but it was not statistically significant, although most of us would argue that that seems to be an increase in time. The OTA classification transfer from an outside facility and the LEAP data did not show to be statistic in our cohort. Of the 20 patients with the infection, over half were 55% only received appropriate weight-based dosing versus 72% of patients without infection. And that overall infections were actually most commonly related to organisms that are not covered by cephalozoin, including MRSA and Enterobacter. On the right, you can see our table of non-MRSA related infections and whether or not patients were underdosed or appropriately dosed with cephalozoin, and 23% of those patients were underdosed. Of the 7 patients who sustained a non-MRSA gram-positive infection that would be appropriate for our prophylactic antibiotics, 71% of them were underdosed. So, in conclusion, 55% of patients who developed a deep infection were appropriately dosed with ANSEF versus 72%. Patients with preoperative hypertension documented in their health history at a 3-time higher risk of having a deep infection. The most common infections sustained in our cohort were Enterobacter and MRSA, a third each, which is not covered by our prophylactic antibiotic that was given, and that appropriate weight-based dosing of ANSEF for prophylaxis of high-grade open tibia fractures reduces the rate of gram-positive non-MRSA related infection. Thank you.
Should have had that picture to lead into Ryder's talk. All right. Next is Zach Farr, outpatient hip safety in an ambulatory surgery center is independent of approach.
Thanks again to all of our sponsors, to the Ingram family, and to the Campbell Foundation. Title of this talk is Outpatient Hip Safety in an Ambulatory Surgery Center Independent Approach. No disclosures for this talk regarding myself or my co-authors. This was recently accepted into Journal of Arthroplasty. Just as an introduction, with total hip replacement, we have 2 main approaches that are used by our surgeons, anterior approach and posterior approach. Just like any good orthopedic surgeon, your approach is typically what you think is the best. So there's been a lot of debate on which approach is superior between orthopedic surgeons. This has led to a lot of literature throughout the past decades basing the competition between these two approaches. However, all this research has been in hospital. And as we've shifted from in-hospital to the surgery center, there's very few studies that involve our ambulatory surgery centers. We have seen that surgery in our ambulatory surgery centers, we do tend to like. A hospital we don't like as much. Orthopedic surgeons in general do like the control aspect of the outpatient surgery center, but it also has benefits such as infection rates and cost benefits as well, which are important. So there's limited data out there that we know about how these two approaches compare to each other, specifically in terms of safety in regards to the outpatient setting, and particularly in an ambulatory surgery center where they go home on the same day as surgery. So the purpose of our study was to compare the 90-day complications that we see in our ambulatory surgery center with total joint replacement between these two approaches. Our hypothesis was that there'd be no difference in regards to safety, and hopefully this could help guide treatment plans. So our methods, this was a single center retrospective review. We looked at our outpatient total hips performed at our ambulatory surgery center, and this gave us 432 total hips, 346 with a direct anterior approach and 86 with a posterior approach. In terms of the outcomes that we looked at our demographics and comorbidities as well as pain scores, the overall time that patients spent in our ambulatory surgery center, and then the rates of some of the things we'd consider as complications, such as having to stay overnight, an emergency room visit, and admission to the hospital, reoperations, or other complications, again in the 90-day period following surgery. In terms of our results of our demographics and comorbidities, in general, the patients between the two groups were overall the same. There were a few highlighted in red that were different in terms of age, slightly older group in our direct anterior approach compared to our posterior approach. BMI was slightly higher as well. And then history of coronary artery disease as well as smoking had slight differences. But overall, the patient population was generally the same between the two approaches. In terms of our outcomes that we wanted to look at, our pain scores were excellent with both approaches, going from 4.5 on average preoperatively to less than 1 at the time of discharge. In terms of their overall time in the surgery center was around 9 hours. And then admission rates, reoperation, overnight stay, ER visit, and other complications were again very low between the two. There were no statistically significant differences between either approach, direct anterior or posterior approach. Looking at our complications a little bit more in detail between the two approaches, the overall complication rate was 3.5% for anterior and 2.3% for posterior approach. Again, this was not statistically significant. In terms of what all complications we saw, there was fractures, infection, dislocations, reoperation, readmissions. In terms of posterior approach, the two that we saw in that 90-day period, one was an intraoperative fracture and one was a dislocation. Once they returned home, these both were taken care of with an uneventful recovery. In terms of our anterior approach complications, looking at them in a little bit more detail, again, there was a higher number overall of these done, and no statistically significant difference in the overall number. But these consisted of a couple periprosthetic fractures, some infections, dislocations, and also some issues with nausea in the perioperative period. But again, looking at the outcomes of these were able to be taken care of in an ambulatory surgery center setting and recovered uneventfully. In conclusion, we didn't see really any significant differences between these two approaches in regards to overall safety in the ambulatory surgery center. A few complications, and really our conclusions from this are that it appears to be safe to do this procedure in the outpatient setting, specifically in a freestanding ambulatory surgery center that's not connected to a hospital. Ultimately, in terms of one being more safe than the other, we don't think that there's really much difference, and this should be a surgeon and patient conversation in terms of their preference. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, our final presentation will be from Carson Ryder. Firearms can be safely used following shoulder arthroplasty.
All right, so let's go back here. So my name's Carson Ryder. Today I'm going to be talking about firearms after shoulder arthroplasty. And to echo my colleagues, I just want to thank the foundation, the Ingram family, the Campbell Clinic for allowing us to talk today. I have no disclosures. You can visit the Academy website for the additional disclosures. I want to thank my co-authors for their work on this paper. So some background information. Shoulder arthroplasty is a safe and reliable procedure that leads to pain relief, improved mobility, and better quality of life for our patients. And just like other areas of arthroplasty, the number of shoulder arthroplasties performed each year in the United States and across the world are increasing. Younger patients are now seeking arthroplasty, and the survivorship remains high for these patients. And after surgery, these patients really seek active lifestyles, especially here in our neck of the woods in Tennessee. Many participate in shooting sports and hunting. And the number of patients that participate in shooting sports and hunting has increased in the recent years. So, one of the benefits of being here is patients come to us with a question. They say, hey, can we shoot? Can we hunt after shoulder surgery? Well, the purpose of this study was to determine whether or not they can safely return to the activities. And we hypothesized that they would be able to do so. We had 473 patients that underwent either anatomic or reverse total shoulder arthroplasty with a minimum of 2-year follow-up. And these patients were retrospectively analyzed through a prospectively maintained database. And when it came down to it, we had about 41 anatomic totals and 29 reverse totals. We excluded revision cases. And as you can see here, a majority of our cases were for primary osteoarthritis as well as rotator cuff tear arthropathy. This was a single surgeon deltopectoral approach in the beach chair position. And what we did after surgery was we administered this firearm use survey. And our primary endpoints were the ability to continue shooting as well as patient satisfaction. And we had secondary endpoints of shooting-related limitations and shooting-related complications. So about 60% of our patients used shoulder-mounted firearms after surgery. These included shotgun, rifle, muzzleloader. And out of that group, about 80% were considered heavy firearms. This meant 12 gauge or larger for shotgun and rifles that were over 30 caliber. 64% mounted the firearm on their operative or dominant extremity after surgery, and in this group of what we classified as shoulder-mounted firearms, there were no firearm-related complications. 87% used handguns post-operatively, most commonly a 9mm or a .22, and again, no firearm-related complications were noted in the handgun group. So what about hunting? 54% of patients hunted after shoulder surgery, and you can see here they pursued a wide variety of wild game. 68% of patients reported recreational shooting. You can see the numbers there. We had actually almost 20% of our patients shooting over 1,500 rounds a year, which is a pretty significant amount of shooting after arthroplasty. And almost 90% reported no change or improved ability in their shooting skills. Again, just most important to note here is no firearm-related complications in the hunting or recreational shooting groups. About a quarter of our study group from our initial cohort used firearms postoperatively. 80% had no limitations. And of the 20% of patients that had limitations, all of these were related to shooting endurance over 1 to 2 hours of activity. 85% reported no or minimal pain. 87% had no change or improved shooting ability. So again, a large portion of these patients were able to continue shoulder-mounted firearm use on their operative extremity. 97% were able to use a 12 gauge or larger, which showed us that heavy shoulder-mounted firearm use is still possible after arthroplasty. And these results were consistent with other return to sports studies such as golf and lower extremity activities. So in summary, it is safe to continue shooting and hunting after shoulder surgery. Rates of return to these activities are similar compared to other sports that have previously been studied, and again, no shooting-related complications. So thank you for allowing us to present this research.
Thank you, Carson. I don't know how the voting's going to come out on the award, but I think that wins most Campbell Clinic study ever. Okay, guys, come on up. We will take some questions from the panel. Dr. Beatty.
I have a question for Andrew. So the recommendation was in some ways that this continued to be studied on a regular basis, right? Just what do you think is the timetable to do that? Is this I think we're doing this all the time anyway, but is it something we formally should do annually, every other year? What do you think?
I think it's something that, obviously is going to be different depending on what changes come with the policy. Obviously, you're kind of fighting, getting a big enough window versus, not wanting to jump the gun and jump to conclusions. We're already starting some more projects here looking at shoulder pathology with a similar study, and I think probably the next step is to delve deeper into it and look at possible etiologies for it, especially for our Medicaid patients who bore the biggest brunt of the burden, it seems like, from our study.
Dr. Azar.
A question for Kat. So, Kat, with the Enterobacter and the MRSA and the hypertension, all these things, you guys, what's going on over there at Region 1 now as far as how you approach these patients?
So Dr. Wineline and I started this study when I was an intern, and after we published it, we decided that we would implement a prophylactic protocol of our antibiotic treatment of all open fractures, not tibia in general, and that we changed our antibiotic conference for susceptibility of those two organisms specifically as well. We have not instituted vancomycin as an open treatment for prophylactic because of the side effect profile, but we have added Zosyn to our type 3 tibia fractures and grossly contaminated wounds in order to cover more gram-negative and polymicrobial infections that we were seeing based off of this study. I think that this study also is a springboard to further develop susceptibility profiles for open treatment or open tibial infection prophylaxis and treatment with our colleagues in infectious disease. And we have talked to the UT group about that as well.
Thanks.
Dr. Mahalka.
Dr. Ryder, if you answered this question, I apologize. I was trying to follow your one list along. You said that the one reason why patients couldn't return or was longevity, was time of use of a firearm?
Right. So it was their biggest limitation was endurance activity. So
Okay.
shooting longer than 1 hour, longer than 2 hours.
So the follow-up question I have is, did you ask anybody if they went to a different firearm?
That's a good question. So if you look at that survey, the survey is very detailed. Under each section, it has rate your ability to use each firearm, and if you had limitations, why. So they had a chance to sort of elaborate on why they could not perform, and most of it just said endurance. They did not mention going back. That'd be an interesting area to look at for sure, but it seemed that endurance was their biggest limitation. We got Dr. Beatty.
Yes, so just a comment, I think, about was it 87% said that they showed no improvement in their shooting ability after, is that right?
87% had the same ability or improved ability.
So, or improved ability?
Yes, sir.
And so I would like to contrast that as you commented about golfers, because I think, speaking on behalf of all golfers, there's no technology that will not improve our game.
That's right. Yes, sir.
The total shoulder is good for about 12 yards off the tee, Jim. So if you haven't eaten anything, just go out back. We'll
completely agree.
Dr. Ryder, you're not going to get off the hot seat just yet. I actually have a question as well. I know you've looked into this literature, but I am unfamiliar with it. You have said that total shoulder replacement does not impede shooting and perhaps can make it better in some ways. But what about the shooter, the lifelong professional shooter? Does that increase your risk of osteoarthritis of the elbow or the wrist or the shoulder?
So there were no studies out there. Tanya and I, we cleaned the database, and unfortunately, there's not any of that stuff out there. There's a couple older studies looking at primarily rifle-related stuff, but nothing about competitive clay target shooting. So that's why this was a good paper for me.
All right, Dr. Farr. So you were very careful to not state this, but I'm going to put you in the hot seat. Which one will you use and why?
Yeah, so for me, I'll be training for fellowship, kind of a recency bias before I go out into the private sector on my own. I'll be doing direct anterior approach. So I think that's what I'll be most familiar with at the time of starting practice. So if I was to choose one, I would choose it. But based on current literature, I think that there is no real data that points towards one being superior towards the other.
There's a question here from the chat on your paper. If it was understood correctly, 0% revisions for posterior approach and 1% for anterior approach. The revisions are not good. So is that number big enough to direct you one way or the other?
No, it's not. This is kind of a first paper with limited numbers. As we've transitioned from 2-week stays with a pain pump all the way to now same-day surgery in an ambulatory surgery center in the recent decade, few institutions are implementing this same-day surgery, but that makes the numbers a little low. So our numbers were a little low. Our direct anterior approach was much higher in this kind of landmark paper, and so it did have one more revision compared to the posterior approach. But again, the posterior approach numbers were smaller, and it was not statistically significant. That revision happened to be because of recurrent dislocations, and the acetabulum component need to be revised.
All right, thanks. Kat, you're back on the hot seat for one more question. So using hospital arrival as a surrogate for time of injury may be a little bit challenging because do you have any data from your hospital about the range of time for transport from injury to the hospital?
No, I do
Fairly
not.
Consistent, or is that a factor that could be considered?
That is an extreme factor that now in the recent literature for the care of open fractures has become elucidated. We are a tertiary referral center for a 500-mile radius, and we understand that a lot of our patients come from a long way away. But the time to arrival, determining on their time to actual injury versus their time for transport could not, I mean, it can be, but it is a limitation in our study, and it is a limitation in all literature-based support for the treatment of open fractures. Collins specifically has said that the time to treatment, which Packus' study supported, was the single most important factor in reducing deep infection, but that we don't know if that was because that study or that center was 20 minutes away from all of the patients that come to them from their injury, and that the radius of the referral source and your treatment population does determine that, and we did not elucidate that.
So one more follow-up question then, based on your review of this literature, not specifically on your study, but paramedics, EMTs, transport providers can give medications en route if directed by a physician.
Mm-hmm.
Should antibiotics be added to the medications that they're allowed to give for open fractures?
I think that is something that people are going to start looking at in the near future. I think that the safety profile of the majority of the prophylactic antibiotics that we use is broad enough to basically give any patient that they see with an open scrape or an open fracture in order to reduce the rate of infection versus the complication rate that may ensue from kidney failure or anaphylaxis from a not known documented allergy for an untended patient. But I do not know of any of that actually being discussed at this time, and I think that that would be a great stepping stone for this kind of paper.
All right, well, thank you to our residents for a really outstanding symposium. Well done to all of you. We are going to take a break. My compliments to the residents. You guys were so efficient. We whipped through this pretty well. So we will actually take a little bit longer break than what you have on your schedule, and we will plan to start our next panel at the appropriated time. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Thanks to everybody, and thanks also to our residents for a great symposium. We're going to switch gears now. We're going to talk about advocacy, and we're really fortunate to be joined by some real leaders in this area, and all at different levels. And it's really going to be an exciting time to talk about how advocacy is done on the local level, the regional, and then the national level. So, as I said, we're joined by some people that have a lot of experience with this. Our former partner, David Lavelle, who served as the chairman for the Methodist Department of Orthopedics for several years. Also, Sam Morrell from Ortho South, who has been very active on the regional and also national level through the Tennessee Orthopedic Society. He's also been a representative on the board of counselors for the academy. And then finally, of course, Dr. Guy, who is knee-deep in all this in his term in the presidential line of the academy. So we'll start off with the local level with Dr. Lavelle.
Great, thanks, Quinn. I want to go ahead and get started. So I was the chairman of the orthopedic department at the Methodist Hospital here in Memphis, and starting about 2012, and went to 2015. And compared to the job that these other fellows have done, it's a very small job, but it was an opportunity for me, and one that others might want to participate in. So, in wondering why someone in the latter part of their career would become interested in any kind of advocacy, I thought of my father's example. My dad was an ear, nose, and throat surgeon and president of the hospital staff at the Baptist for a few years, and he thoroughly hated it. It was a very disgusting job to him. And in asking, Dad, why are you doing this if you don't really like to do it? He said, they need somebody with sense in this position. And so taking my father's cue, I looked at the example at the Camel Clinic. When I was asked to join the staff, Dr. Milford, and then later Dr. Toombs, and later Dr. Canale, all encouraged me to do something other than just do joint replacement or trauma surgery and see patients in the office. And there was a long history there. And I remember when I was asked to join the staff, Dr. Milford said, you're not going to just be a member of the Camel Clinic and do surgery and see patients, but you need to figure out a way to give back. And while I was on the staff, I didn't like going to committee meetings, and Dr. Canale would chastise me about that. So I told him, I said, Dr. Canale, I'll do the night call schedule. And that way I'll avoid being on any committees. And so for 15 years, I did the call schedule. At a time in my life when I'd gone off call, I quit doing the schedule, I really wasn't doing anything outside my clinical practice, it occurred to me that I might offer something locally at the medical hospital level. So having been primarily a hospital-based physician doing joints and trauma, and having learned from Dr. Freeman, Barney Freeman, who is a great role model, and keeping up with paperwork and keeping up with minutia, I thought I might offer something there. The other thing is that at the moment, I felt I was willing to listen, willing to learn, and willing to learn how to express myself. And so that was part of the reason why I was interested in doing this. I really didn't have any agenda outside of trying to do good patient care. Excuse me. I'm having trouble with my slides. Okay, so in terms of activities of the orthopedic department, there's a number of meetings that are required. The monthly medical executive committee meeting was a meeting of all the significant hospital administrators and other department chairs. There were quarterly departmental meetings. The issue of orthopedic department credentialing was something that we always had to meet with someone in the administration about on a regular basis. One of the bigger jobs was evaluating irregularities and variances, which primarily involve things of timing of antibiotics before surgery, CMS guidelines, and irregularities in that regard. There were times when dispute resolution was important, and you did have some disputes from time to time. And I'll get into that a little bit more. I did want to encourage and be supportive of the department's criterias and regulations. I had to make out the ER schedule, and then I needed to verbally advocate both for physicians but also for patients, like Jim had talked about earlier, the people who weren't in the room, who were the patients. The CMS program was a big headache. Understanding CMS, understanding its protocols, understanding how it functioned, and this was a significant part of what I spent time trying to do. It wasn't like that's a two-way street either. I mean, you take CMS guidelines and you learn to live with them. It's not like you can give CMS feedback and help them understand how variances might occur. In terms of influence, you want to try to help the hospital establish their priorities. And hospitals are constantly being tugged in tremendous directions. They're being tugged by the local community where they live, the leaders of the communities, the mayors and the folks that are in charge. They're being tugged by the media. They're being tugged by the insurance companies, the payers, CMS, the Medicare, Medicaid, and all of the other functionaries. And so trying to help the hospital understand where the priorities should lie and how to navigate some of that is very helpful. You want to be a voice for the non-hospital employed physicians, and this has gotten to be an extremely important role, I think. Basically, many physicians are employed, obviously. And as orthopedic surgeons, generally speaking, we're not employed. And so we can give the hospital, I think, a little bit better feedback, and maybe even something that's a little bit more honest in terms of feedback when we're not employed by the hospital as opposed to being employed by the hospital. One of the most important things was helping our colleagues understand why the hospital policies are the way they are, and recognize that, some things don't make sense, some things are stupid, some things are a real pain in the butt, but you have to realize that policy is the hospital is the policy of the hospital. And then, like Reeves Moore talked about earlier, cost versus benefit of new technology, and we've talked a lot about that. In terms of adversarial groupings, you can't get around the fact that there are adversarial relationships that we're all living with. We've got hospitals versus physicians, and sometimes that's adversarial. We'll have surgeons versus non-surgeons. Non-surgeons have a different way of thinking. They also have a different language than we have. There are independent physicians versus hospital-based physicians. Again, we have a different set of priorities than they have. And then even within the orthopedic department, there's surgeon versus surgeon adversarial problems sometimes between the different groups or even within the same group. And so you have to be willing to navigate all of that. And all I can tell you is that it takes a bit of listening, it takes a bit of patience, and it takes an effort to learn how to communicate. So what did I gain out of doing this? I was the chairman for 4 years, and I was glad I was able to do that. It did contribute to my own personal growth. I felt like that I was better able to understand and communicate at the end of that 4 years than I was at the beginning. In terms of personal relationships, I really did make some good friends within the hospital and within the hospital administration, understanding that they have a different set of priorities and different set of ideas than I had, but we were still able to communicate. I felt like I was able to give a fair representation of what orthopedic surgeons needed. One thing that you have to realize is because I say a thing is so, doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to understand and agree with you. It is so. And so you have to learn how to articulate your desires and your needs in such a way as not only they understand, but they can empathize with what you're saying. I felt like I was a fair representation of what the hospital needed from the medical staff. There were times that I had to deal with doctors who had conflict, and that took a bit of patience, understanding, realizing you have to communicate. We recognize that we still need each other. In this day and age of outpatient surgery being the not just the wave of the future, but the future, we recognize that hospitals are still a necessary part of medical care and probably will be for the foreseeable future. I don't see any way that all surgery will eventually be in surgery centers and outpatient surgery. It's just not practical, it's not possible, it's not feasible in the 2020s. And at the end of the day, being a member of the medical staff and then being involved in the medical department, it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. So with that, I'll be taking questions in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you, David. And I'm just recalling here your well-known love of committee meetings, and thank you so much for your service for the group and everyone at the Methodist. But we're following you up with Sam Morrell, who, for those who don't know, has maybe the most thankless job in orthopedics right now. He is the chair, or was the chair, of the resolutions committee for the BOC and the BOS, which, if you ever want to watch sausage get made, go to one of those committee meetings and the endless wordsmithing and stuff, and it's like David Lavelle hell. So with that, Sam, who is, as I said, been very active on the regional and national level, he's going to focus a little bit on statewide advocacy.
Well, great. First of all, I just want to say congratulations to all the chiefs that are finishing up and wish you the best of luck next year. But sort of turning to the state level, I had initially thought to do a presentation similar to David's about what it involved. But given the circumstances of COVID and what it did to our legislative season this year and how it affected us, I thought it was more important to actually summarize what's happened and where we stood and how we've approached things as an orthopedic society here in Tennessee. As usual, things started out on the work comp side. We are very well represented there from the input of people on both the advisory council as well as the efforts of people on the reimbursement side. And when I say people, I mean physicians that are involved. But as usual, the biggest efforts were aimed in that arena in limiting scope of practice. In this case, from the nurse practitioners who want to have an equal footing as physicians and being named on panels as providers, as well as physicians' assistants who have fought for that same status. In the end, we were very effective in reaching out to the voting members and getting both the labor representatives as well as the employer representatives to actually vote this down unanimously. And it was nice because at no point in the history of the Work Comp Advisory Council had they sent a negative recommendation and then had the bill be successful. And that was the case for those efforts. And in fact, as if to add icing to the cake, when they presented their cause, their lobbyists and they themselves were so poorly organized and started bringing up many other things that they wanted that their sponsors even backed away from their bills. But getting to the General Assembly, as y'all are all aware, the General Assembly took an 8-week pause in March because of COVID. At that point, there were 133 bills that we were essentially following because they were healthcare related. And in the end, we really came up a bit short, although the game's not over in these cases. And so I really want to sort of walk you through on what sort of happened when the assembly reconvened. The goals were different on both the House side and the Senate side, and the House was intent on essentially trying to pursue all legislation that had been put out there. And so they had a much more expansive goal. The Senate, on the other hand, said, if it's not related to COVID, and if it's not something that's going to be revenue generating, we're not taking it up and we're not going to address it. We're just going to let it die in committee. So essentially what happened was the House said, we're going to champion provider-friendly legislation, or that's what essentially did happen. And most of their bills were passed unanimously. The Senate, on the other hand, didn't have that momentum. And in the end, efforts to regulate insurance companies or provide patient protections essentially almost all failed. And I want to walk you through just a few of them that are important, not just here in Tennessee, but are important on a national level. We've relied upon the Academy and their resources to try to bring some of their tools in to be effective here. One was balanced billing, which in this case was a bill that would require the commissioner for the Department of Commerce and Insurance to establish what was going to be called an independent resolution process, in which case you would dispute these out-of-network emergency services or balanced billing. In other words, if you were in the emergency room seeing a patient and it was something that Campbell Clinic didn't accept, how would you, but you were on call and obligated to see this patient, how would that work itself out? And it was a process that would first ask the provider and insurance to work it out. And if that weren't the case, then there would be a third-party mediator that was based on comparable market values, sort of the fair market value that the Academy had put forth a few years ago. It would mirror the New York model and essentially draw on some of the provider-friendly provisions that were present in the Texas model. The way it played out, the House passed it 91-0 in favor of it. The Senate sponsor, Bo Watson, who had seen what had happened with some of his other bills and other senators' bills, pulled it at the last minute because the provider-friendly bills were essentially being voted down. It was interesting that a similar type process happened with the CON process. Both parties were excited about revising certain of the population benchmarks. For instance, that 250,000 number that was a threshold for whether you could proceed with MRI scanners without a CON was going to be revised down to about 175. What happened was there was also a push to eliminate CON for ambulatory surgery centers, freestanding ERs, and what they were terming micro hospitals or more specialty specific hospitals. It went into conference committees. It was interesting that this was delayed until the final week. Unlike any other committee this year or in the past, they did not permit any outsiders to be present. And in the end, they came out and said, we don't have enough time to prepare a majority report. And so without that, they couldn't go to a final vote. And so it basically died in committee without any compromise being reached. Telemedicine, as you all know, CMS said telemedicine should be reimbursed at the same rate as an in-person visit. Many people turned to this as a form of seeing patients during the initial phases of COVID. Perhaps not as effective for orthopedists, but still a fair number of orthopedists were using it. Both the House and Senate side passed different versions of the bill, and so that was going to require a conference committee, but that couldn't take place before the Assembly basically disbanded in March. And so Governor Lee passed that as executive order. That expires tomorrow. So there was a feeling of an urgency to be able to get something passed so that people could continue using telehealth or telemedicine when they need it. They did come up with a 6-member joint panel. They agreed to essentially, in theory, to say we're going to extend this for the next 18 months. During that period, we hope the free market will work itself out. And it also wanted to broaden the eligibility. So you had people like speech therapists who worked in the schools who were not eligible to do telehealth and really had no way of billing for their services because the schools were closed. The House again passed it 89-0. It never was taken up in the Senate. And so it basically died. And so right now, as of tomorrow, there's nothing that will permit people to do telehealth. We're also finding now that even though that executive order exists, some of the insurance carriers are being very resistant to actually paying on parity. One that I want to talk about is the Tennessee Recovery and Safe Harbor Act. Many of you may have heard of that because it's essentially a limited liability for acts during the COVID pandemic. And it was aimed at protecting businesses and healthcare providers from lawsuits stemming from COVID-19. Both the House and the Senate agree that legislation is needed. What happened in the end was there was a dispute over a retrospective clause that the Senate put forward that would go back and retroactively cover entities, where the House side did not have that. And members of the House, namely current and former trial attorneys, felt that it was unconstitutional, although it was argued that because of the extreme nature, the Tennessee state constitution permits that. In the end, everyone sort of got held hostage. And what they did was say, if you're not going to budge on the retroactive side of it on the House, then the Senate would not let certain bills come forward. So again, it died. It leaves things in sort of a precarious situation. The governor has talked about going ahead and calling a special session, really nothing for this limited liability bill. And so we will continue to work on that. Our lobbyist group, Capital and Fifth, has already been up there lobbying this past week. And we've got some of our orthopods that are there in Nashville working there with some of the Tennessee or people who are based there in Tennessee. But certainly any of you all who have connections, we really need your input. Also, we work on a shoestring budget, and it's interesting. On the national level, we have done an excellent job, but could always do more on raising funds for advocacy. And I'm sure Danny Guy will talk to you about that. But, you know, we're the little guys and we need some money here at home. I'm not making a push for that. Campbell's always been great about donating to that fund, as have the other large groups in the state. I'm going to stop there, and hopefully Danny will give us some great advice on the national level.
Thanks, Sam. That was a great update. And so we will now go to the national level with Danny. I've really had the good fortune to get to know Danny a little bit through our time together at the Academy, and he brings an entire career's worth of experience in terms of advocacy here to this talk. And I'm also reminded of his experience in Washington, D.C., because there was a time about a year ago when he and I were there together for a meeting, and he introduced me to this place called the Round Robin, which is a bar about 2 blocks from the White House, which is reportedly where the mint julep was invented, and it's probably where a lot of deals have been struck over the years. So it was there was a lesson in there for me, Danny, about how diplomacy is conducted, both where and when. So hopefully you'll have some other lessons for us as well.
Thanks, Quinn. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. So there we go. We're good. Quinn talks about the Round Robin Bar. It's actually kind of a neat place. It's right next to where we stay in our hotel. And as many people know, alcohol is the oil of conversation. So we can have many good discussions up there about things not orthopedic in nature. So I want to start by saying this particular publication is available to you. You can get this. This is a June 16th edition. You can always see where you are. You can find this on the website under advocacy, and it's specific to things that are in Washington right now, but occasionally it dips down into the state realm. So Quinn has me batting cleanup and offering a few remarks about national advocacy. And usually this is a time in my presentations for the Academy where I'll highlight what are the pressing issues in front of us, how the Academy is advocating, and what you can do to help. So that's the what, the why, and the how, and I will touch on all of those. The message, though, today is the how. So these are some of our 2019 successes. Increased funding for orthopedic research, improvements in the bundled payment program, and a health disaster response bill that was signed into law, and the others you see here. But it's a brand new year, and these are among those things on our plate. Sam just mentioned what he called balance billing, but it's also known widely as surprise billing, prior authorization reform, physician-owned hospital relief, and misvalued codes. Now, I'm not going to speak to liability reform, as it's always out there, doesn't gain much traction, but there does seem to be a bit of renewed interest, particularly in the Senate, in reforming liability across the board with COVID, and we may yet benefit. Also, due to the COVID crisis, we may see some opportunities as well for physician-owned hospitals. Surprise billing. Well, as you can see here in these highlights, it's been the focus of a lot of effort and has been pretty effective overall. At this point, we are being mainly vigilant that this is not tacked on to a COVID funding bill with something that we don't really want. The remedy for this problem will be partially driven at the state level, as 28 states, sounds like Tennessee's in it too, have enacted legislation, Georgia the most recent, with our bill sitting on the governor's desk for signing. And there's many others that are considering. However, the reason federal action is needed is that some 61% of employers are managed under ERISA plans, and these are not subject to state oversight or state legislative initiatives. So here you see HR 3107, and that addresses prior authorization, some 220 co-signers already. This would impact both Medicare Advantage and ERISA programs. We do need relief here. Just an anecdote of concern, and some of you may be aware of this, is the very recent announcement by United Healthcare that it will require electronic transfer of X-ray, CT, and MRI images as part of prior authorization for joint arthroplasty, including shoulder and spine surgery. Robert Barrick, who's at WashU and current president of the Hip Society, just brought this to our attention last week. And unfortunately, my guess, not policy, but just my own opinion, this very onerous overreach by United may fall along the lines of surprise billing and require both a state and federal remedy. Misvalued codes. Well, that refers to the update by the RUC. That's the RVU Update Committee for Hip and Knee Arthroplasty. And we have lobbied very hard on many fronts that the RVUs for hip and knee arthroplasty are reasonable. Unfortunately, CMS can see a $300 million system cost reduction with this. And we hope to minimize the impact, but anticipate some reduction. Here, I'm going to tell you, as orthopedic surgeons, I've listened very carefully to talks this morning. We're victims of our own process. RVUs are calculated based on the work for each CPT code. So when you shorten the length of stay, you perform outpatient joints, and you reduce post-op visits in a hospital or in the office, we are taking items off the list that were part of the RVU equation. So some good news. Here's the amazing advocacy success story for peer-reviewed orthopedic research program. And this is a collaborative effort with the Department of Defense, and it was authorized in 2009. And we continue to see just huge research benefits for our orthopedic patients. And I can go down the list here of what has been provided. Almost $290 million reported for over 270 studies, from clinical trials and publications to products brought to market. This year will be no exception. We're going to ask for even more, $35 million. They're probably not going to give it to us, but we're still going to ask. In comparison, OREF, our important profession-led research program, provided $11.5 million in research grant funding between 2014 and 2018. Here's the difference, and both are vital programs. Taxpayers provide the dollars for peer review orthopedic research. Our donations support OREF. If you're not supporting OREF, I'd like you to consider adding your name to the list of annual donors. All right, and then this happened. Well, we didn't abandon our advocacy plans for 2020, but COVID has made the list a good bit longer. Our Office of Government Relations, OGR, has been advocating nonstop for practice support, offering elective surgery guidelines, providing patient information for surgery, resources for practice management, including telemedicine, and also offers resources as well for education, and there's a landing page for research publications. You can read all of this stuff, detailed information present at our COVID resource page. You don't need to log in for this. You just search aaos.org, and it's right there on the initial landing page. You hit the red Learn More button that you see, and there is a lot of very well organized information here, and I would recommend it to you. There you'll also find the latest information on how to apply for the various economic supports out there, from advanced payments from Medicare, payroll protection, and small business loans. We, along the rest of healthcare, have received a lot of financial support, but it's not going to make up the loss. In addition, we, as orthopedic practices, have received some $260 million as part of a grant program, and these dollars do not require repayment. So we're all familiar with some recent events throughout the country. Our president for the Academy, Joe Bosco, specifically addressed this in a recent letter. We stand with you. We advocate for everyone. The Academy has for many years put programs into place to address inequities in our profession. We've seen improvements in our committee makeup and the leaders of our Academy. I think our intentions have been honorable, yet we still fall into the very last place among surgical specialties when it comes to gender. And underrepresented minorities in orthopedics is an even smaller percentage. Again, we've improved, but not nearly enough. On the left, there's remarks from Eric Carson, from Robert Gladden, and Marlene DeMaio from Ruth Jackson. They're highlighted. I'd recommend those to you, and they identify choices that we should consider. You know, traditionally, inequities have been referred to as a pipeline problem. That's not where the Academy has ventured in the past. It's probably time that we should look for opportunities to partner in a meaningful way and really move this needle. This is advocacy too. So we have some difficult problems ahead, and we should embrace the opportunities afforded us. And sometime you have to seek and make your own. So now for the how. And I know it's pretty easy to tune me out at this point. Sam already's asked for a little money, but he's not going to be as forceful as I will. But I want to convince you, and I don't plan to do this by myself. This is where Tennessee stands on PAC participation, and for information, you want your state to be in the black. What I see is dark gray for the volunteer state, which means that collectively orthopedic surgeons in Tennessee contribute at a 16 to 20% clip to the Academy PAC. So here's the opportunity. The how, in other words. So I'm going to really slow down, because if I had taken the plane, or I was actually thinking about driving to Memphis, If we were together right now, I'm sure I'd see cell phones coming out of pockets at a rapid pace. All you have to do is text AAOS to 41444 and donate. Don't put it off. Do it right now. You will be supporting the Academy efforts I've just gone over. It's easy and your support is needed. Maybe you're inspired to do even more. And I'd like you to consider joining us in our in-district event that will be in August and replaces this year's canceled NOLC, which is our annual DC lobbying effort. I've already scheduled my congressman, and I've also organized a fundraiser for him. And you know, a fundraiser in an election year is like catnip to someone running for election. Tennessee's Board of Counselor and your state society exec have all the details, and if you can't find them, you contact me. I mentioned I had some help. This is called Columns by Canale, and I think really should be mandatory reading for all orthopedic surgeons. I've got a copy. In his May 2010 editorial, he talks about success and getting what you want. His perspective about success comes from his career-building background as a player on the Virginia football team. And at that time, Virginia lost 28 in a row until the athletic director of Virginia had the foresight to add William and Mary to the schedule to snap the streak. Now, Dr. Canale reminds us that their win is really owed to the fact that Mary was probably playing on the defensive side of the ball. He remarks, though, that he understands now how to lose, but he's not a good loser. He wants to win. Well, the winning he was referring to was this: it's advocacy. In my vice presidential address this year, which I'm sure nobody heard because it was online, I likened advocacy to baseball. It's a long season where you win some and you lose some, and some get rained out. And rainouts, you know, they're not always bad for us. Dr. Canale's closing remarks ask us to stay involved. Well, if we do, then we may see some success. If we're not involved, then we better get used to learning to be happy with what we end up with or what we get. So without asking his permission today, I hope that Terry Canale has helped me provide the winning inspiration to get each of you involved in advocacy. You know, being on the sidelines is just really not an option. If we hope to get near the goal line, we need everyone to join in and stay in the game, and not just this year. Otherwise, I think we may be looking at a 0-28 record. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. That was great. So we have 4 panelists in here, but also we've had some online questions I think Dr. Kelly can share with us.
All right, well, we will start as we went through. Dr. Lavelle, did you need to or feel necessary to alter your clinical practices in any way during your service to the hospital?
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, the Campbell Clinic did provide for me the opportunity to adjust my surgery schedule on the Wednesday mornings that I had to go to the executive committee meeting at the Methodist. So instead of starting surgery at 7:30, I would start it at, I think at 9 on Wednesday mornings, and that was one Wednesday a month. So yes, indeed, the clinic gave me that opportunity. All the rest of the committee meetings and the work that I did was done after hours.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Morrell, what is the largest COVID-related impact on the orthopedist in the next 12 to 24 months at the state level? Can you look into the future and tell us what we're going to expect? You're still muted, Dr. Morrell. I'm not. There we go. Thank you.
In my crystal ball, I would like to give you a great answer. I think a lot of these things are concerning. I think that you're going to find funding issues that trickle back to us. I think the limited liability is a real issue here for us. And like Danny was saying, I don't want to see some of our issues with balanced, what they're calling balanced billing here, be tied into legislation with COVID and being sort of an afterthought or a way of actually addressing this that is quite harmful for us as the clinic is, as we are over at Ortho South, and the vast majority of our orthopedists in the state of Tennessee are. We are not employees of the hospital systems. So in many cases, the products that they have signed up for are not necessarily our own. And it puts us at odds with the insurance carrier, but also at odds with our patients. And clearly, we're still all going to do the right things, but at the end of the day, somebody needs to pay the electric bill and the mortgage note. So all those things become a much greater reality for us. And I think they will continue to be in the next 2 years as the economy becomes more significant. And we find that more and more of our employees are not our employees, but our patients may not have insurance as their jobs evaporate.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll continue there with a slightly different worded question for Dr. Guy. What is COVID causing the orthopedic community to overlook that may cause us potential harm? We may have taken our eye off the ball because of COVID, and in what way have we done so?
Well, I can't think of anything specific where we've taken our eye off the ball, but I'm pretty certain that we're going to see a large ebb and flow to infection where you may think you're good, and within a week you find out you're overwhelmed. And where we have a bit of an advantage right now is we're able to test where we couldn't test initially when we were in the total shutdown. And I'll tell you, I live in a town of 35,000 people, and we were the hotspot in Georgia. And where we had returned to elective surgery at the hospital, that's been suspended. And so one of the things that I know we're going to probably be dealing with across the country at various times and in different locations is that our revenue streams are going to be compromised. I know at Emory, that's who I work for, is they, in the 2.5 months we were in lockdown here, they had a burn of $250 million, of which they only got $150 million in support from the government. It's very hard to make that money back. I don't care how hard you work. And as we try to go back to work, it's hard to get back to the full speed that we were used to beforehand. And so we're having to be creative about staffing in our offices. If it becomes a dire situation again where we really do have to lock down, I think we might be seeing more support economically from the Congress, but I don't see any in the near future. So again, I'm not really answering your question because like Sam, I don't really have that good crystal ball. I think we've tried to look at this from every angle from the academy, and we're looking at it constantly.
All right, well, one more question, and this is taking to some of your last points. As an orthopedic community, and particularly as an academy, how do we overcome the pipeline problem for diversity?
Okay, so I like to think of this as the academy's always going to get the downstream credit for an upstream problem. In other words, we still have to live with our 7% gender inequity or our 2% underrepresented minority. We got to live with that. On the plus side, residence now for women is up to 15%. That's a hell of an improvement, doubled. But you know, medical students are 50%, a little over 50% are women. And it seems as though there's not really an interest. I think almost every program out there right now is looking to hire or bring residents on that will make us match our population. I think where we're missing the boat, and this is personal opinion, is that things like the Perry Initiative, that is a Ruth Jackson initiative, or Dimension, which is underrepresented minority initiatives, I think they're targeting the wrong audience. And when I say that, I think we should be looking at the incoming medical student. Medical students get almost no education on orthopedics. We all know that. ACGME doesn't help us or support us on that. And I think we need to actually have a program where we're out there telling people what a great profession orthopedic surgery is, and realize it's hard because we've selected ourselves to being top 10% of the class to even get in a residency training program. So not only we have to target people early in medical school, and I'm talking about the first year, we have to select the ones that are at the top because we don't want to dilute the quality of our profession. So that's personal opinion, but I think that we can get there, but we're going to have to partner with a lot of groups to do it.
Okay, well, thank you for everybody. That was very informative and a terrific symposium and a good way to close this out. So we have done our tallying of our scores here, and it's my honor to present the Hugh Smith Research Award. So for those unfamiliar, the top scoring presentation from those 8 resident research projects that you heard earlier, those get rated by a panel, and the highest rated presentation wins an award and also some money to be used towards educational endeavors for their fellowship. So this is actually a very close vote this year, closer than normal, but this year's winner is Matt Fournier. You hear cheering from the other room. You can come out here, Matt. So we're not allowed to shake hands anymore, but you get a fist bump and a certificate. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Azar, who is going to take us home.
Yeah, so on behalf of the Campbell Clinic and the Campbell Foundation, I wanted to, first of all, thank the Ingram family for always supporting this annual endeavor. It's become something, grown into something really pretty special. Also, I want to thank the Campbell Foundation, our staff especially, the research team. You know, it's got to start somewhere, and Margaret and all the coordinators for that, and also our editorial staff, Kay and Linda and everybody that works on this, because none of this could get done without you. Appreciate that very much. And also the faculty mentoring. There's a lot of mentoring that goes on at these subspecialty meetings that occur weekly, and so to thank the staff for that. For today, I want to thank our industry, all the support we had from industry. This is obviously asking you to do something that was different from what we've done in the past, and you stepped up, and we appreciate that. Also, our Campbell Foundation actually throw this together. This is obviously everybody's pivoting and innovating. I want to thank Jennifer Strain and the foundation staff, and especially Derek Kelly, who's really led us with this whole Ingram lectureship, the transformation we've had for a number of years. And also want to thank and congratulate our speakers, our residents for their work, everybody who participated today, our guest speakers, especially Dr. Guy. Appreciate you all very much. Dr. Merrill for taking time out of his practice today, and Dr. Lavelle for coming back and speaking to us also. So thank you all, and we'll have a graduation ceremony here in a couple hours. So we're out. Thank you.
Guy, are you there? Dan Guy, are you there? Anybody there?